It was Christmas Eve. Snow fell gently on the city. People laughed. They carried shopping bags. Families walked close together. The streetlights were bright and beautiful. Everyone seemed happy. But Juan felt very sad. He was a giant man. He had broad shoulders. He had a massive body. But his heart was completely empty. His parents died a long time ago. He lived all alone. He wanted someone to love. He wanted a real home. Juan walked toward the subway. He wanted to escape the happy crowds. Then, he saw an old man. The old man wore a dirty Santa suit. He sat on the cold, icy ground. He held a small cardboard sign. The sign said, "Tell Santa your wish." Juan felt sorry for the old man. He stopped walking. He bought a carton of milk. He took some money from his pocket. He placed them gently on the sign. "Merry Christmas," Juan said. Suddenly, the old man grabbed Juan's hand. His grip was incredibly strong. Juan was shocked. He could not move his arm. "You are a truly good person," the old man said. "I must reward you. Tell me your wish." Juan was a little scared. He tried to pull his hand away. But the old man held tight. The old man looked desperate. Juan gave up. He sighed. He decided to tell the truth. "I want a family," Juan said softly. "I want a home that will never leave me. I want a wife as gentle as a rabbit. I want a daughter as cute as a squirrel." The old man smiled. It was a creepy smile. His eyes turned a glowing, scary red. "It is done," the old man whispered. "A pure wife and a sweet daughter are yours." Juan finally yanked his hand away. He ran into the subway station. He thought the old man was just crazy. Juan got on the empty train. He sat down. He closed his eyes. The train hummed quietly. Juan fell into a deep sleep. Juan woke up. He felt a freezing chill. The train was gone. The city was gone. He looked around in panic. He was inside a rusty iron cage. He had no clothes on. Heavy metal chains locked his feet. A dead man sat next to him. The dead man wore dirty rags. Outside the cage, a horse pulled the cart. Guards walked next to the cart. They wore old, metal armor. They spoke a strange, ugly language. Juan did not understand a single word. He realized the terrible truth. He was not on Earth anymore. He was in a different world. He was a slave. Weeks passed slowly. The cart traveled far across the land. The weather was freezing. Juan was starving. The guards stopped at different villages. They sold slaves to the local people. People bought the strong and healthy slaves. But no one bought Juan. He looked too weak. He looked too broken. Juan lost all hope. He felt totally alone in this cruel place. Why should he keep living? This new world was pure hell. He looked at the dirty floor of the cage. He saw a rusty metal fork. Juan picked up the fork. He held it tight in his big hand. He decided to end his life. Death would stop the cold. Death would stop the pain. He pressed the sharp fork to his neck. He closed his eyes. He got ready to push. Then he heard a soft voice. He opened his eyes. A woman stood outside the iron bars. She was beautiful. She had a kind, warm smile. A little girl hid behind the woman's dress. The girl had big, cute eyes. She had messy blonde hair. She looked just like a small squirrel. The woman reached into the cage. Her hand shook with fear. She gave Juan a piece of crusty bread. Juan stared at them. He felt a warm spark in his cold heart. He dropped the fork. It hit the floor with a loud clang. The heavy wooden cart finally stopped in front of a small, cozy cabin hidden deep in a quiet forest. For Juan, everything changed the moment he stepped inside. It was nothing like his cold, rusty iron cage. The air was warm, smelling of burning wood and fresh food. At a simple wooden table sat a beautiful woman and a little girl with messy blonde hair. The soft light from the fireplace glowed on their faces as they ate. The little girl slurped her hot soup with so much joy that the whole room felt bright and happy. Juan stood quietly and watched them. The woman was as gentle as a rabbit, and the girl was as cute as a tiny squirrel. Suddenly, it all made sense. The crazy old Santa Claus he had met back in the city had not lied. The old man's promise was coming true. Juan's reward had finally begun. As they ate, Juan watched a beautiful moment unfold. The mother gently pushed her own bowl toward her daughter, claiming she wasn't hungry. But the little girl was smart. She knew they were both starving. She took her spoon and carefully poured exactly half of her soup back into her mother's bowl. A look of deep, pure love washed over the mother's tired face as they smiled and finished their meal together. However, this happy home held a dark and painful history. Just a few days earlier, their peace was shattered. The cruel village chief had kicked open their door. He told the terrified mother, Rigi, that the village leaders had made a decision. Her abusive husband had recently been killed by wild wolves. Now, a cart full of slaves had arrived, and she was forced to take one as her new husband. Rigi had felt like her world was ending. Her first husband had beaten her terribly. Her only light in the dark was 5-year-old Dorothy, her dead husband's daughter. Rigi loved the child deeply and swore to protect her. The thought of another violent man entering their lives filled her with dread. The next morning, Rigi and Dorothy walked to the village gates to face their fate. On the dirt road, they saw a large wooden cart carrying a heavy iron cage. Inside sat a massive man hiding in the shadows. It was Juan. Rigi froze. She noticed the hollow, desperate look in his eyes. He was holding a sharp metal fork to his own neck, ready to end his life. The mean village chief walked up and began insulting Rigi. Despite her fear, Rigi felt a deep pity for the desperate man in the cage. She knew what it felt like to want to die. Reaching into her basket, she bravely handed a piece of fresh bread through the cold iron bars. That small, warm act of kindness changed everything for Juan. The pure innocence of the child and the gentle care of the woman pushed away his dark thoughts. He dropped the fork. He wanted to live. The chief angrily snatched the basket away and ordered Rigi to go home. Once she was gone, soldiers dragged Juan out of the cage. His bread fell into the mud. He was forced to his knees beside 2 other weak slaves. What happened next would haunt Juan forever. Without warning, the soldiers drew their swords and killed the other 2 slaves right there in the dirt. A soldier then dipped his fingers in their fresh blood and drew symbols on old paper scrolls. The bloody symbols instantly glowed with an eerie blue magic. Juan was frozen in terror, realizing he had been thrown into a cruel, magical world. Back at the cabin, an old woman from the village brought Rigi some supplies. She told Rigi that the new slave had soft hands, like a nobleman, meaning he might not be a violent brute. But Rigi just cried. She didn't care about a comfortable life. She only prayed for a man who would leave her and her daughter in peace. The next morning, violent pounding shook the cabin. Rigi pulled Dorothy close as the village chief kicked the door open. He dragged a massive, bleeding man into the room. It was Juan. Seeing this giant man hurt and treated like an animal, a rare spark of anger flashed in Rigi's timid heart. She yelled at the chief for being so cruel. Then she looked up and recognized Juan. He was the man she had given the bread to. Juan was just as shocked. Why was his saving angel shaking with fear? Impatient, the chief grabbed their hands. He forced Juan's huge, rough fingers to lace tightly with Rigi's small, shaking ones. "You are now husband and wife," the chief declared coldly, slamming the door as he left. Left alone in the quiet cabin, Juan gently squeezed Rigi's hand. He looked at his frightened new wife and the sweet little girl hiding behind a chair. His heart raced in his chest. The old man's magical promise was real. His new life had finally begun. Juan remembered the strange promise of the old Santa. The old man had promised him a pure-hearted wife and a sweet daughter. Now, looking at Rigi, Juan saw a gentle rabbit. Her little girl looked just like a tiny, wide-eyed squirrel. Juan could hardly believe it. Had that crazy old man actually granted his wish? But reality quickly brought a wave of anger. Sending him to a cruel, alien world felt like a sick joke. Why couldn't the gift be given gently? Instead, he had faced pain and humiliation. Juan lowered his head. Silent anger darkened his face. He ground his teeth. If he ever saw that Santa again, he would make him pay. His intense fury rolled off him like a wild bear. Instinctively, the mother and daughter shrank back in fear. After the awkward introduction, the village chief and some men took Juan into the woods. The chief yelled something in a harsh, strange language. Juan couldn't understand a single word. His head spun. Then, a blond man stepped up and offered his hand. Juan smiled and took it. Instantly, the man squeezed hard. It was a test of strength. The man's face twisted with effort. Juan frowned. He squeezed back just a little. Effortlessly, Juan lifted the young man clean off the ground. The man dangled in the air and screamed. The chief yelled in shock. The man's hand turned an angry red under Juan's grip. After Juan let go, the man fell to his knees, clutching his hand. The chief quickly changed his tune. He started waving his arms wildly. He handed Juan a bow and arrows. He even hopped around like a rabbit to explain. They wanted him to hunt. The chief pointed at the bushes and yelled. Juan saw a small white rabbit eating leaves. He had never used a bow before. Still, he took a firm stance and pulled the string. The arrow flew with terrifying speed. It hit the ground so hard the rabbit jumped and ran away. He had missed completely. Yet, the chief jumped for joy. Juan was totally confused. Why were they praising a missed shot? Just then, Juan saw Rigi and the little girl walking toward him. His heart raced. He realized this was truly his family now. A deep blush spread across his face. Everyone looked confused by the giant, shy man. Later, they shared a simple meal in the woods. Rigi made hot soup with vegetables and meat. Tension filled the air. When Juan picked up his spoon, the mother and daughter flinched. He stopped. His heart broke at their fear. Slowly, a warm smile spread across his face. It melted away his cold look. For years, he had been totally alone. Now, he had a family. The feeling was strange, but wonderful. He looked at the sky and smiled. The next day, they hiked to their mountain home. Juan carried the heavy bags easily, but he kept looking back. Rigi and the girl were exhausted. Juan couldn't speak their language to ask if they were okay. He remembered his mother's advice. When you want to protect someone, do not hesitate. Juan turned around and walked straight toward them. Rigi looked terrified. She begged for mercy with her hands. The little girl started to cry. Juan sighed. He knew his huge size scared them. He knelt down to look friendly. Softly, he spoke a single word to ask permission. Then, he gently reached out. With incredible ease, he lifted them both. Rigi sat on one broad shoulder. The little girl rested safely in his other arm. Rigi gasped in shock. He was as steady as a mountain. The little girl's tears turned into a happy gasp. Juan smiled. He promised himself he would learn their language. He would become a great hunter to feed them. Rigi nervously grabbed his shoulder. Juan covered her small hand with his big one. A silent bond formed. Their fear slowly melted away. They felt safe against his strong back. Juan carried them all the way up the mountain. They finally reached a small wooden cabin. The village chief waved goodbye and left them alone. Juan looked at his new home. It looked freezing. He remembered his bitter past and took a deep breath. He pushed the heavy wooden door open with hope. Suddenly, Rigi ran outside. Her face was red and tears streamed down her cheeks. Juan rushed to her, asking what was wrong. She stayed silent. Juan looked inside the cabin and his blood ran cold. The house was completely empty. Neighbors had stolen everything while they were away. The furniture, the shelves, and even the survival tools were gone. They had no way to fix the house. They had no weapons to fight wild animals. They were completely helpless. Juan found Rigi sitting in the cold shadows outside. She was shaking and crying in total despair. He sat down next to her. He kept a respectful distance, but shared the heavy silence. Gently, he reached out and stroked her hair. His touch was incredibly soft. Rigi stopped crying and looked at him with wide, glassy eyes. Juan gave her a small, warm smile. He wanted her to know everything would be okay. Rigi was still confused. They couldn't speak to each other. He didn't know how to hunt. How would they survive? But Juan looked deeply into her eyes. In a deep, strong voice, he promised to protect her. He gently held her cheeks in his large hands. It was a gesture of pure respect. A single tear rolled down Rigi's face. This time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the strange, warm trust growing in her heart. In the fading sunset, Rigi felt a rare sense of peace. Somehow, this giant stranger made her feel perfectly safe. Juan's mind drifted back to his old life. Since his parents died, he had been completely alone. He had always fought hard just to survive. Out of habit, he clenched his hand into a fist. It was a quiet reminder of his strength. But now, he finally had a real family. He had a true reason to stay strong. He pounded his chest in determination, silently promising to do whatever it took to provide for them. That silent vow broke Rigi. The emotional dam burst, and she began to cry heavily. Without saying a word, Juan gently pulled her close. He let her rest her head against his broad shoulder so she could release all her pain. Just then, the little girl saw them from a distance. She thought Juan was hurting her mother. In a flash of fierce anger, she charged toward them. She threw her tiny arms around Rigi from behind, yelling for the big man to leave her mother alone. In seconds, the three of them were tangled together. It was a clumsy, awkward hug, but it was their very first hug as a complete family. Holding the crying woman, Juan felt his heart swell with warmth. The little girl was crying now too. Many questions swirled in his mind. Where was the child's father? Why did this poor woman share her bread with him when she had nothing? What tragedies had caused her so much pain? Juan pushed those sad thoughts away. He hugged them both even tighter. He made a powerful promise to himself. He would make them the happiest people on earth. He vowed to be the best husband and father. He wanted them to never regret letting him into their family. Soon, the sun went down. Long, dark shadows covered their small wooden cabin. When they went back inside, they sat on the floor across from each other. An awkward silence filled the empty room. Juan thought the hug would bring them closer, but they still felt like strangers. Rigi felt the same way. This giant man was a mystery to her. They had to figure out how to live together, but they didn't even know where to begin. Suddenly, Juan had an idea. He snapped his fingers and leaned forward. He wanted to break the invisible wall between them. He pointed to his chest and spoke in a firm, clear voice. "Kim Juan," he said. He repeated it slowly. Kim Juan. He hoped they could at least learn his name. It worked. Rigi looked up in surprise and softly repeated the sounds. Juan smiled and held out his hand, silently asking for her name. She paused, then whispered, "Ri." She took a deep breath and said it clearer. "Rigi, Rigi," Juan said with a huge smile. What a beautiful name. Next, Juan turned to the little girl. He smiled sweetly and asked her name. The child hid her face against her mother's side. Juan looked into her big, innocent eyes and realized something sad. Maybe she did not have a name at all. A wave of pity washed over him. Without hesitation, he gently stroked her messy hair. He decided to give her a beautiful name. Dorothy, he said. He thought of the brave girl from The Wizard of Oz. She was a hero who went on a great adventure, found loyal friends, and fought for happiness. The little girl tried to say the word, Zezugrati, she babbled. Juan laughed softly. He explained that the name would bring her many friends and lots of love. She didn't understand the words, but she understood his kind tone. Her face lit up with a huge smile. She tried again and said it perfectly. Dorothy, with their names shared, their new life truly began. Juan went outside to work. He swung his axe into the wood with powerful, steady chops to fix the house. From a safe distance, Rigi watched him. He was much bigger and stronger than her late husband. Yet, he was incredibly gentle with her. She had never met a man like him. She softly whispered his name to herself. Juan, she had no idea where he came from, but saying his name felt warm and sweet. In her entire life, Rigi had never been treated with such kindness. She wondered why this giant man was so good to her. Suddenly, Juan stopped chopping wood. He turned around, smiled, and called her name. In that moment, she noticed his dark hair and dark eyes. This reminded her of a famous rumor. People said a faraway country had summoned a legendary hero with jet black hair and jet black eyes. Could this kind man be the legendary hero? As Juan walked closer, Rigi felt shy and confused. She looked up at his tall, strong body. Her heart fluttered with a mix of fear and hope. When she looked closer, she realized his hair was not jet black. It was dark brown, just like his eyes. Rigi let out a quiet sigh of relief. He was not a magical hero. He was just a normal man who was unusually strong. But why did she feel so happy and peaceful? They had only met today. Her face turned red with shy confusion. Suddenly, Juan reached out. He gently placed his large hand on her head and stroked her hair. Rigi froze. In her painful past, a man's raised hand always meant she was going to be hit. But Juan's hand just brushed through her hair. It was so gentle and warm. Instead of wanting to hide, she felt safe. She secretly wished he would never stop petting her hair. Seeing her relax, Juan gently pulled her a tiny bit closer. His own face started to turn red. Rigi looked so peaceful. Without warning, Juan slowly leaned forward and gently pressed his lips against hers. It was a sudden, sweet kiss. Rigi opened her eyes wide in shock, but she did not pull away. In that short moment, all her worries disappeared. All she felt was the pure sweetness of their first kiss. Then, Juan pulled back very fast. He looked completely shocked by his own actions. His face turned bright red. He stammered, but no words came out. He was incredibly embarrassed. The silence between them felt very heavy. Needing an excuse to run away, Juan grabbed a wooden water bucket. He held the handle tightly. Without saying a word, he turned around and sprinted toward the stream. He left Rigi standing there all alone. Her face was burning hot, and her heart was beating fast. She just stood there, happily thinking about the kiss. Meanwhile, Juan walked by the dark stream. He scolded himself out loud for moving too fast. He paced nervously, reminding himself that they were still strangers who could not speak the same language. The more he thought about it, the more panicked he became. He walked around in a fog of worry. Lost in his thoughts, Juan walked deep into the dark woods. Suddenly, a terrible chilling howl echoed through the trees. It broke the quiet night. Juan jumped. He told himself to focus, get the water, and go back to his family. But then, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Sweat dripped down his forehead. Out of the pitch-black bushes, a giant wolf slowly stepped forward. Its eyes glowed like burning red coals. It blocked Juan's path completely. The beast growled deeply and showed its sharp, terrifying teeth. This was a true monster of the night. Juan took a slow step backward. He stood perfectly still, gripping the wooden bucket tightly. He tried to stay calm, knowing the deadly beast was about to attack. Juan did not run away. He slowly put the wooden bucket down. He grabbed a heavy fallen log. It was a terrible weapon, but it was all he had. He gripped the rough wood tightly. He stared right into the giant wolf's glowing red eyes. He was ready to fight for his life. The beast jumped at him with terrifying speed. Juan swung the log hard. He blocked the wolf's deadly bite. The crash shook his bones. The wolf was incredibly strong and completely wild. It pushed forward and threw Juan backward. Juan flew through the air and hit a tree hard. His vision blurred, and he saw stars. Pain shot through his entire back. But Juan refused to die here. He let out a loud, angry roar. He charged right back at the terrifying wolf. He wanted to grab the monster by its throat. He squeezed his eyes shut. He put all his anger and all his will to survive into his hands. He had a family now, and he was not going to leave them. Suddenly, his arm began to burn. It felt like strange, hot energy was rushing through his veins. A sharp sound echoed in the dark woods. A bright golden light burst from his hand. Actual fire exploded from his palm. The wolf growled in fear. The magical flames wrapped around the giant beast. Juan was completely shocked, but he didn't stop fighting. He jumped onto the wolf's back. He pushed all of this new wild energy into his burning fist. He punched the beast as hard as he could. The fiery strike lit up the dark forest. The wolf collapsed immediately. It was dead in an instant. Even after the wolf stopped moving, Juan kept punching the air. His heart hammered in his chest. His body was running on pure adrenaline. Finally, he stopped. He fell onto the soft grass, breathing heavily. He looked at his hands in pure disbelief. He knew they had just been on fire. Yet, his skin was perfectly fine. His clothes were not burned at all. It was a complete mystery. Juan sat there, totally amazed. He had just used real magic. He remembered reading comic books and stories back home. In those stories, people who traveled to new worlds often got superpowers. Maybe he was like a hero in those stories now. He felt a sudden burst of hope. He pointed his hand at the dark sky. Fire, he yelled. Nothing happened. Only the cold wind blew through the trees. He tried again. His voice grew louder. Fireball, wall of flame, dragon's breath. He even tried waving his arms around. He felt a little silly. Nothing worked. The magic was gone. However, he knew it was not a dream. The pain in his back was completely gone. The magic had healed the bruises from hitting the tree. Juan looked up at the bright stars and smiled. If he could learn to control this fire magic, he could easily protect Reggie and Dorothy. He could hunt big animals to feed them. He could even heal them if they got sick. This power was an absolute miracle. Sitting in the quiet woods, old memories suddenly washed over him. After his parents died, only his grandfather had loved him. But then, his grandfather died in a sudden accident. Juan was left all alone with cruel relatives. He remembered his grandfather's funeral perfectly. An angry uncle had hit him hard. The uncle called Juan a curse. He screamed that Juan was the reason his parents and grandfather were dead. From that day on, everyone treated Juan like a monster. He was just a lonely high school student, but they hated him. Juan shook his head. He pushed those dark ghosts away. He was not a curse. He picked up the heavy dead wolf and put it on his broad shoulders. He remembered watching his grandfather prepare chickens on the old farm. If his grandfather could see him now, he would be so proud. Juan started walking back to the cabin. He just needed to figure out how to wake up his magic again. Back inside the warm cabin, Rigi and Dorothy were making dinner. Dorothy happily handed a wooden bowl to her mother. Rigi smiled and thanked her. Dorothy beamed. Her smile was as bright as the morning sun. She skipped around the glowing fireplace, feeling safe and happy. Then she heard a strange sound outside. Dorothy stood on her tiptoes. She looked out the dark window. Suddenly, a giant, scary wolf face appeared in the glass. Dorothy let out a terrifying scream. She fell backward onto the floor. Rigi's heart dropped. She yelled for her daughter. Rigi didn't freeze in fear. She grabbed a dull kitchen knife. It was her only weapon, but she didn't care. She ran to the door, pushing Dorothy behind her legs. She threw the heavy door open, ready to fight the monster for her child. The sight outside made Rigi freeze. She broke out in a cold sweat. Juan was kneeling on the ground. The giant wolf was draped over his shoulders. He looked incredibly tired. Rigi thought the beast was attacking him right then and there. She screamed his name in a complete panic. Juan looked up, completely confused by her screaming. Rigi raised her knife high. She was going to stab the beast to save her man. Then she stopped. She realized the wolf was not moving. It was already dead. Rigi dropped the knife. It hit the ground with a loud clatter. Her face turned bright red with intense embarrassment. She ran to Juan and threw her arms around him. She touched his face and arms, frantically looking for blood. Juan was surprised by her tight hug. He quickly told her he was okay. A second later, Dorothy ran out. She wrapped her little arms tightly around Juan's legs. She was crying very hard. Juan smiled softly. He knelt down to their level. He showed them a tiny scratch on his hand. He explained that it was just a very small bite. It didn't hurt at all. He gently rubbed their heads. He kept whispering that he was safe. Slowly, their breathing calmed down. Rigi hugged him tighter. She whispered words he didn't understand. It sounded like a quiet prayer of thanks to the sky. Dorothy sniffled against his leg. Juan held them both closely. He felt terrible for scaring them so badly. Later that night, Juan went to the wooden shed. He needed to skin the wolf. He used a sharp blade to cut the heavy hide. He moved like a professional. However, it was very hard work. He wiped sweat from his forehead. He realized he needed to find an easier way to do this next time. Still, he kept cutting. He wanted to make sure his family had plenty of meat. Suddenly, he heard a soft voice. It was Rigi. Juan turned around and smiled. She was standing in the doorway. She walked over and placed a large wooden bucket on the ground. She pointed to the clean meat and then to the bucket. She made funny cooking gestures with her hands. Juan finally understood. She wanted him to put the meat in the bucket so she could cook it. He nodded happily. Then, Juan realized something important. He wanted to thank her. He searched his memory for the words she had used earlier. He wanted to try speaking her language. His tongue felt thick and clumsy. "Go ama," he stuttered. Rigi's eyes went wide. Then, a beautiful radiant smile spread across her face. Juan panicked a little. Did he say the wrong word? Did he sound silly? Rigi stepped closer. She looked up into his dark eyes. She spoke very softly, gently correcting his pronunciation. "Goma," she whispered. They stood there in the quiet shed for a long time. They were standing very close to each other. The air felt warm and special. Juan smiled back at her. He tried again, speaking clearly this time. "Goma," Rigi blushed deeply. She smiled and shook her head, trying to tell him it was no problem. She felt so confused, but so incredibly happy. In her whole life, she had never known a man who said thank you. A simple thank you was something Ri had never heard from her own family. It was only a small gesture, yet it meant more to her than one could ever imagine. Since meeting him, she had experienced many things for the very first time. Suddenly, the memory of their first kiss flashed across her mind. Her cheeks instantly turned bright red. A wave of shyness, mixed with curiosity, rushed through her. She quickly turned away and hurried off, trying to hide her embarrassment. As she walked, one thought kept circling in her mind. Had he ever kissed another woman before? The question made her heart ache. She didn't understand why it bothered her so much, but the emotions became so overwhelming that she felt as though she might burst into tears. A little later, they returned to the shed to continue preparing the meat. Ri worked quietly, unable to stop thinking about Juan. In her village, processing meat was usually considered a woman's responsibility. Yet Juan handled the work naturally, as though it had never mattered to him whether a task belonged to a man or a woman. Why was he so different? She couldn't understand him. Even so, the two of them worked together surprisingly well. Without saying much, they moved in perfect rhythm, each naturally helping the other. As the silence stretched on, Ri found herself thinking once again about the strange feelings growing inside her. Is this really love? Without realizing it, she slowly closed her eyes. Juan noticed. Without hesitation, he stepped closer and gently kissed her forehead. The soft touch filled her heart with warmth. For a brief moment, she simply stood there, enjoying the feeling. Then, reality returned. Embarrassed by her own thoughts, she quickly stepped back, silently scolding herself for expecting something more. Juan only smiled calmly. His peaceful expression somehow made her even more flustered. He probably thinks I wanted another kiss. Determined not to embarrass herself again, she looked straight at him and forced herself to keep her eyes open. But before she could say anything, Juan leaned toward her once more. This time, he kissed her properly. It was gentle, warm, and completely unexpected. When he finally pulled away, he looked at her with eyes full of kindness, affection, and respect. The tenderness in his gaze made her heart race even faster. Trying to hide his own embarrassment, Juan picked up the bucket of meat. Only then did he realize something. Where's Dorothy? He looked around in confusion. A moment later, he spotted a tiny face peeking through the doorway. Dorothy had been watching everything. The little girl had witnessed the entire scene without making a sound. The moment Ri realized they had an audience, she let out a small cry of embarrassment. Her face burned crimson. Without another word, she covered her cheeks and ran into the house. Juan could only stand there awkwardly, while Dorothy blinked at him innocently, completely unaware of why the adults were acting so strangely. Later that day, the three of them decided to take a walk through the forest. Ri led the way, while Juan followed behind with Dorothy beside him. The quiet path was peaceful, surrounded by tall trees and the gentle sound of birds. Dorothy happily skipped ahead before suddenly stopping. She reached out both hands toward the heavy bucket Juan was carrying. She wanted to help. Juan smiled warmly. Thank you. Instead of smiling back, Dorothy frowned. She puffed out her little cheeks and looked almost offended. Juan stared at her, confused. Then he realized his mistake. He hadn't called her by name. Understanding immediately, he knelt beside her. Thank you, Dorothy. The little girl's face lit up with joy. Simply hearing her name spoken with affection made her happier than anything else. With renewed excitement, she proudly helped push the heavy bucket all the way home. Back inside the cabin, Ri carefully spread the wolf's hide across the floor. Juan watched curiously. To him, it still carried a strong smell. He couldn't understand why anyone would want to keep it inside the house. But as he watched Ri gently run her fingers across the soft fur, he realized it meant far more than a hunting trophy. To her, it represented safety. It reminded her of the day he had protected both her and Dorothy. Seeing how much she treasured it filled Juan with quiet satisfaction. Dorothy sat beside her mother and curiously touched the fur. Then she picked up a smooth little stone from the floor. Pretending it was a comb, she carefully brushed the wolf's fur as though grooming a pet. The innocent gesture made Ri smile. Juan smiled too. Watching the two of them together filled the small cabin with a warmth he had never known before. Not long afterward, Ri stepped outside to prepare dinner. She carefully laid fresh pieces of meat in the open air so they could dry properly. Juan watched every step with great interest. So this is how food is preserved in this world. He memorized everything she did. If he wanted to survive here, he needed to learn these skills himself. He also noticed how pleased Ri looked when she found the animal fat he had saved earlier. Apparently, keeping it had been the right decision. That small success made him smile. Still, he understood how little he actually knew. This world was completely unfamiliar. He didn't know what people valued. He didn't know how trading worked. He didn't even understand which everyday skills were considered essential. If he wanted to protect his new family, he had to learn as quickly as possible. With that thought, he stood up. He had rested long enough. It was time to get back to work. Ri immediately noticed. She hurried over and gently stopped him. Her face was filled with concern. She motioned for him to sit down and continue resting. Juan smiled reassuringly. He slowly shook his head and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'm all right." His smile told her that his body had recovered and that she didn't need to worry. Ri hesitated for a moment. Finally, she sighed and nodded. Although she was still worried, she stepped aside and allowed him to go. Juan picked up his axe and walked toward the forest. He wanted to gather more firewood while also becoming familiar with the trees around him. He had heard that oak made excellent firewood, although he still wasn't sure how to recognize one. After searching for a while, he found a tree that looked suitable enough for practice. He tightened his grip on the axe. Taking a deep breath, he swung with all his strength. Thud. The blow was incredibly powerful. Unfortunately, he had used far too much force. The axe slipped from his hands and shot through the air, spinning wildly before disappearing into the trees. Juan froze. Seriously? He stared at the empty space where his axe had been, then covered his face with one hand. "I can't believe I just did that." After several minutes of searching through bushes and fallen leaves, he finally found the axe. Shaking his head, he laughed at his own mistake before getting back to work. By the time the sun began to sink, he had gathered a large pile of firewood. He loaded everything into a heavy basket, lifted it onto his back, and happily made his way home. As soon as he stepped inside the cabin, he noticed that both Ri and Dorothy were waiting for him. The worried expressions on their faces disappeared the moment they saw him. Before Juan could even greet them, Rai hurried over, grabbed his hand, and gently pulled him inside. She sat him down without saying a word. Juan blinked in confusion. Then she carefully took his rough hands into hers. Using a damp cloth, she slowly wiped away the dirt, dust, and sweat that covered them. Juan felt strangely embarrassed. No one had ever cared for him like this before. He wasn't sure how to react. Nearby, Dorothy watched the scene with great interest. Suddenly, her eyes sparkled with excitement. She had an idea. Without warning, she turned around and ran outside. Juan and Ri looked at each other in confusion. A few moments later, Dorothy returned carrying a small container filled with water. It was clearly too heavy for her. Water splashed over the sides with every step, leaving a trail across the floor. Even so, she proudly made it all the way back. Without hesitating, she lifted the container and poured the water straight onto Juan. Splash! Cold water soaked him from head to toe. For a second, Juan simply sat there, in complete silence. Then, he looked at Dorothy's hopeful little face. She had only wanted to help. How could he possibly be angry? A smile spread across his face. Ree couldn't hold back her laughter any longer. The cabin quickly filled with cheerful laughter, replacing the earlier worry. Dorothy tilted her head in confusion. She seemed disappointed, almost as if she had expected a much bigger reaction. Seeing her expression, Juan chuckled softly. He knelt down beside her and gently stroked her head. "Thank you, Dorothy." The little girl's face immediately brightened. Receiving praise from her new father made her happier than anything else. Excited, she spun around, ready to run outside again and bring even more water. Juan quickly stood and stopped her before she flooded the entire house. Ree laughed even harder. Watching the two of them together made her heart feel lighter than it had in years. Only a few days earlier, she had believed happiness was impossible. Now it was right in front of her. More than anything, she wanted to protect these precious moments forever. As evening settled over the forest, thin curls of smoke rose from the cabin's chimney. From a distance, it looked like any ordinary home. Inside, however, a new family was slowly learning how to live together. Dinner was finally ready. Fresh meat filled the table, the result of all their hard work. Dorothy had exhausted herself during the day and had already fallen asleep before the meal began. Juan and Ree quietly ate together. Neither of them felt the need to speak. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. For the first time, they felt comfortable simply sharing each other's company. After dinner, both of them looked toward Dorothy. She was sleeping soundly with her thumb tucked into her mouth. The innocent sight brought gentle smiles to both of their faces. Juan carefully lifted her into his arms. She didn't wake. Her small body rested peacefully against his chest. He carried her to the bed beside the fireplace, where the warm flames filled the room with gentle heat. Slowly, he covered her with a blanket and made sure she was comfortable before quietly stepping away. Meanwhile, Ree remained by the fire, cleaning up after dinner. She carefully washed the dishes, unaware that Juan had walked back inside. Without saying a word, he reached out and gently took her hand. The sudden touch made her freeze. She looked up at him in surprise. Her cheeks turned bright red. Juan himself wasn't entirely sure why he had done it. It felt almost as though his heart had acted before his mind could catch up. Slowly, he pulled her closer. She didn't resist. Instead, she allowed herself to rest against his chest. For several quiet moments, neither of them spoke. She could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Somehow, it made her feel safe. Still holding the damp cloth in her hand, Ree reached up shyly and gently wiped the sweat from the back of his neck. It was such a small gesture, yet it carried more affection than words ever could. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought he might hear it. She reminded herself that caring for her husband was simply part of being a wife. Gathering every bit of courage she had, she carefully lifted the edge of his shirt. She wanted to wipe away the sweat on his stomach as well. The moment her fingers brushed his skin, both of them froze. Ree instantly looked away. She was so embarrassed that she could barely breathe. Juan simply smiled. His eyes were warm and gentle. There was no teasing, no impatience, only affection. Even so, the closeness became almost too much for Ree to bear. Noticing her nervousness, Juan gently took her hand again. Their eyes met. The room grew completely still. Outside, only the soft sound of insects could be heard. Leaning closer, Juan whispered softly, "It's time to sleep." Hand in hand, Juan and Ree walked into the cabin's only bedroom. A small lantern filled the room with a soft golden glow. The warm light made the simple wooden room feel peaceful and inviting. Ree's heart was beating so fast that she thought it might burst. She knew what usually happened on a couple's wedding night. The thought immediately brought back painful memories. She remembered her father, his angry face, his cruel voice. She remembered him beating her mother until late into the night. She remembered hearing her mother cry while her father shouted that she would only be hit harder if she didn't stop crying. As a little girl, Ree had hidden in fear, believing that one day she would suffer the same fate. Tonight, she thought that day had finally come. She expected pain. She expected fear. She expected tears. Instead, Juan simply smiled at her. He gently lay down beside her without forcing anything. Dorothy, who had been sleeping peacefully, rested between them. The three of them shared the same bed because the cabin had only one room. For ordinary villagers, this was completely normal. Juan looked at Ree quietly. She really is my wife now, he thought. A gentle smile appeared on his face. Silently, he prayed that nothing would ever separate them. He wished for nothing more than to protect Ree and Dorothy for the rest of his life. With those thoughts in his heart, he slowly closed his eyes. Morning arrived with the gentle crackling of firewood in the fireplace. Ree slowly opened her eyes. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she realized she was lying safely beside Juan. Her head rested comfortably on his arm. On the other side, Dorothy was still sleeping peacefully against him. Ree let out a long sigh of relief. The wedding night she had feared since childhood had never happened. There had been no violence, no shouting, no tears, only warmth, only peace. She quietly moved a little closer to Juan. His steady breathing made her feel safe. Since meeting him, her entire life had changed. The world no longer felt as cold as it once had. Just then, Juan slowly woke up. He blinked for a moment before smiling. Without saying anything, he gently wrapped one arm around Ree and the other around Dorothy. The unexpected embrace made Ree's heart race once again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was happiness. A smile slowly spread across her face. It was a feeling she never wanted to lose. After making sure Dorothy was still asleep, Juan carefully slipped out of bed. He gently brushed the little girl's cheek with the back of his fingers before quietly stepping outside. Fresh morning air greeted him. Ree was already working. She was carrying a heavy bucket filled with water. Before she could lift it any farther, Juan walked over and took it from her hands. She looked up in surprise. His effortless strength continued to amaze her. After setting the bucket down, Juan picked up a wet towel and twisted it dry. Water poured onto the ground as though someone had squeezed it with incredible force. Ree watched with wide eyes. His strength still seemed unbelievable. Juan noticed her staring. He smiled. "Good morning, honey." The word caught her completely by surprise. Honey? Her cheeks instantly turned bright red. She lowered her head. Was it a special title? Or was it an affectionate nickname? Juan scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Maybe he had embarrassed her. After a few moments, Ree looked up shyly. In a barely audible voice, she whispered, "Please keep calling me that." Juan smiled warmly. "Good morning, honey." Ree immediately covered her face with both hands. She was far too embarrassed to look at him. Finding her reaction adorable, Juan gently turned her toward him. "Honey, look at me." Her face only became redder. Just then, Dorothy slowly rubbed her sleepy eyes. She had been dreaming about an enormous roasted chicken leg. Still half asleep, she climbed out of bed. A little trail of drool remained at the corner of her mouth. She took one step, then another, before suddenly losing her balance and falling onto the floor. Juan and Ree hurried toward her at once. "Dorothy." The little girl blinked once before happily wrapping her arms around both of their legs. Apparently, she wasn't hurt at all. She simply wanted a hug. Juan laughed with relief. Ree gently patted Dorothy's head. Moments later, Dorothy noticed the fresh meat stacked inside the cabin. Her sleepy eyes suddenly sparkled. To her, it didn't matter whether the meat came from a wolf, a deer, or any other animal. Meat was meat. She pointed excitedly. Meat. Juan laughed. Yes, meat. Dorothy happily repeated the word over and over while bouncing in place. Meat. Meat. Watching her excitement made both Juan and Ree burst into laughter. Seeing how much she loved food, Juan silently made himself another promise. I'll become the best hunter I can. I'll never let my family go hungry. After breakfast, Juan picked up his sharpened axe. The blade gleamed brightly beneath the morning sun. This time, he walked into the forest with much more confidence. Each day he felt himself becoming stronger. But as he ventured deeper into the woods, the atmosphere slowly changed. The cheerful sounds of birds disappeared. The air became strangely heavy. Even breathing felt slightly more difficult. Juan instinctively tightened his grip on the axe. His eyes carefully scanned the trees. Something feels wrong. He wondered what kind of monster might appear this time. Then, crunch, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Juan spun around immediately, raising his axe. Instead of a wild beast, he found an old man. The stranger wore a heavy hooded cloak that covered most of his body. For a moment he seemed completely unaware of Juan's presence. Then he slowly turned. His face was old and weathered. Deep wrinkles covered his skin. But his eyes remained incredibly sharp. They were as cold as a hunter's knife. Juan remained completely still. Who is this man? And why is he alone this deep inside the forest? The mysterious old man quietly looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. The forest fell completely silent. Only the wind moved through the trees. The old man stood alone in the forest, studying the bloodstains scattered across the ground. He slowly crouched and touched the dried blood with his fingers before examining the surrounding tracks. There are traces of a large beast here, he murmured. The footprints were deep and easy to follow. Whatever creature had been here was enormous. As he walked farther along the trail, his expression gradually changed. He had secretly observed Juan for several days. From what he had seen, the young man barely knew how to use a weapon. His movements were clumsy, and he showed none of the habits of an experienced hunter. Yet the evidence before him told a completely different story. More blood stained the forest floor. The trail continued for quite some distance before ending abruptly. The old man's eyes narrowed. Impossible, even a skilled hunter would struggle to bring down such a massive beast alone. And yet, someone had done exactly that. I need to see him for myself. Without wasting another moment, he followed the trail toward Juan. Back in the present, the two men stood face to face in silence. The old hunter's attention immediately fell on Juan's hands. Several bite marks were clearly visible. He studied them carefully. Those are wolf bites. His mind raced. The wounds should have become infected. The muscles should have been torn apart. Someone injured that badly shouldn't even be able to move normally. Yet Juan stood before him without the slightest sign of pain. The old man's expression slowly changed. There's only one possible explanation. Could he be a mage? Real mages were incredibly rare. Most ordinary people never met one during their entire lives. If Juan truly possessed magical healing, everything could change. A slow smile spread beneath the old man's hood. Not a friendly smile. A hopeful one. He whispered quietly, perhaps this is finally my chance. His eyes filled with a hatred that had been buried for decades. A chance for revenge. Juan, meanwhile, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his chest. The old man hadn't introduced himself. He simply continued staring. Finally, he began to speak. "I'm an old fool now," he said calmly. "But I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I was young." His eyes drifted toward the distant mountains. "I dreamed of becoming a respected forest keeper. In those days, anyone who managed a noble's forests first had to serve in war. If they earned enough merit, they could become one of the Lord's trusted retainers." A faint smile crossed his weathered face. "I left my father behind. I traveled from village to village. I wanted to become an independent hunter. Eventually, I found work as the keeper of a beautiful mountain. The forests were rich. Game was plentiful. It seemed like the perfect life." His smile slowly disappeared. But there was one problem. There wasn't enough firewood. So the villagers often went deeper into the mountains to gather it. "I thought nothing of it. I believed it was simply part of the job." He lowered his head. "I never asked myself why they never went any farther." His voice became much colder. "That mistake destroyed my life." He clenched both fists beneath his cloak. "I never imagined goblins lived in those mountains." Hatred filled every word he spoke. They kidnapped women. They forced them to bear children. They destroyed families. Only now did Juan understand why the old man's eyes carried so much pain. The villagers already knew. They kept it secret. They let me walk straight into danger. I survived. But everything else was taken from me. Silence filled the forest. The old hunter slowly looked back at Juan. "For decades, I stayed alive for one reason. Revenge." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "I've waited all these years for someone strong enough to finish what I couldn't." Inside his own mind, the old man continued thinking. "This giant possesses unbelievable strength. His body heals faster than any ordinary human. He's exactly what I need." The goblins still hid deep within the mountains. Sooner or later, they would attack the village again. Before that happened, Juan needed to become strong enough to destroy them. But first, he must never discover where the goblin nest is. Not until our agreement is complete. Once he's committed, he won't be able to walk away. Juan politely bowed his head. The old hunter immediately noticed something. Even while bowing, Juan kept most of his weight on his back foot. He hadn't lowered his guard. The old man smiled to himself. "Interesting. He's far more cautious than he appears." Looking directly into Juan's eyes, he finally spoke. "From today onward, I'll teach you everything I know. You'll become a true hunter." Juan blinked in surprise. The offer came completely out of nowhere. He didn't understand why this stranger wanted to help him. Still, learning how to survive in this world was exactly what he needed. Before he could ask another question, the scene shifted to the following morning. Juan slowly opened his eyes. "It feels like I only just fell asleep, and it's already morning." Inside the cabin, Ree and Dorothy were grilling meat over the fire. The smell of breakfast filled the room. Juan quietly got dressed and prepared to leave. As he passed the window, he noticed the hooded old man waiting outside. Juan frowned slightly. I'd rather not invite him inside. When he wasn't home, only Ree and Dorothy remained in the cabin. He had no intention of letting a stranger become comfortable entering their home. Outside, the old man stood patiently with a faint smile. For some reason, the smile looked incredibly suspicious. Juan almost laughed. That expression, it reminds me of an HR manager smiling during salary negotiations. Even so, he could tell the old man was trying, in his own awkward way, to behave politely. Just then, Ree called his name. She had prepared a small lunch for him. Carefully wrapping the food in cloth, she placed it into his hands. "You'll be gone all day. Please make sure you eat." Juan smiled warmly. Watching her prepare a lunch for him filled his heart with a strange happiness. She's acting just like a caring wife. Nearby, Dorothy hurried toward the door. She didn't want him to leave without saying goodbye. Ri looked at him with worried eyes. Please, come back safely. Juan nodded. I will. Dorothy quickly hugged his leg. Papa, come back safely too. Juan gently patted her head. I promise. Watching the smiles on both their faces, he felt a warmth he had never known before. Having people waiting for me, it really is wonderful. The old hunter led him deep into the mountains. They walked for a very long time. Eventually, Juan couldn't help asking himself, what exactly is he trying to show me? Finally, the old man stopped. Without saying much, he pointed toward the ground. Juan looked down in confusion. The old hunter demonstrated something with his boots, leaving fresh marks in the soil. Juan carefully compared them with the older tracks already on the ground. His eyes widened slightly. The footprints, they're different. The old hunter nodded. For the first time, Juan realized that the forest itself could tell stories. And that was where his true training as a hunter would begin. Juan watched the old man very closely. He stared at every step the old man took. Is that a special way of walking? Juan wondered in amazement. Is it a heavy stomp or a magic step? Whatever it is, I need to learn it. I must copy his exact movements. With that thought in mind, Juan started to imitate the old man right away. Step by step, he copied him as carefully as he could. The old man just kept walking calmly. Sometimes, he glanced back to check on Juan's progress as they moved deeper into the dark mountains. Later, Juan realized the old man was teaching him the secret mountain paths. The training was much harder than Juan expected. The old man made Juan touch the bark of different trees. This helped Juan feel the unique shape and atmosphere of every mountain slope. Sometimes, the old man made him stand completely still. Juan had to feel the ground under his feet over and over again. He did this until he completely memorized the terrain. The training was tough and repetitive. But slowly, Juan began to truly understand the mountains. After a long time, they finally stopped to rest. Juan sat down on a rock, breathing heavily. The old man quietly opened his bag. Juan's eyes lit up immediately. I finally get to eat the lunch Riji worked so hard to make, he thought excitedly. He quickly opened his own bag and pulled out the lunchbox. A delicious smell filled the air. Juan smiled brightly. It smells amazing, he said happily. But the old man suddenly looked very serious. Do not open your lunch here, he ordered in his strange language. Juan looked at him in total confusion. The old man explained, cooked human food smells very different from the wild mountains. If that smell spreads, dangerous beasts will come straight for us. Hearing this, Juan quickly closed the box. He held it carefully in his big hands. A sad, bitter smile appeared on his face. Riji woke up so early to make this for me, he whispered. I really hope this won't be the first and last time I get to eat it. Juan sat there quietly, holding the box tightly. His heart felt heavy with love and sadness. I feel like I am going to cry, he muttered softly. Soon the old man led Juan to a hidden cabin deep in the woods. The place was very simple and completely isolated. Juan looked around with curious eyes. So, this is where you live? He asked softly. The old man did not answer. Instead, he went inside and came back holding some weapons. Juan stared at one of the bows in confusion. That bow looks very strange, he thought. The bows from my world look completely different. How do you even shoot that? The design was huge and intimidating. The old man handed the massive bow to Juan. Take this and follow me, he said calmly. As soon as Juan grabbed it, his arm dropped from the heavy weight. His eyes went wide. Can I really use this? He worried. It takes so much strength just to lift it. Meanwhile, the old man held his own heavy bow with perfect ease. Juan watched in absolute amazement. He moved so smoothly, Juan thought. It looks like time has stopped. He uses no extra force at all. The old man's motions were perfectly natural. The bow looked like a part of his own body. Then, the old man let go of the string. The arrow flew at terrifying speed. It hit the dead center of the target perfectly. Juan was speechless. His eyes were full of shock and deep respect. He slowly gripped his own bow. He tried hard to copy the old man's exact posture. As Juan aimed, the old man stepped close. He gently corrected Juan's stance. The old man was completely steady. His hands did not shake at all. How is he not shaking? Juan wondered. Juan was struggling just to hold the bow up. He gripped the wood tighter and focused his mind. I must focus, he told himself seriously. I have to remember the new words and the hunter's movements. I need to train harder. I want to be a good man who can provide for my wife and daughter. His determination grew fiercely. Every lesson mattered now. It was not just for his survival. It was for his new family waiting at home. Back at the small house, Regi and little Dorothy sat together by the warm fireplace. Dorothy was full of food and very happy. She sang a cute little song. The sky is blue. The snow is white. Regi's hair is shiny. Juan's hair is black. And the meat makes my tummy happy by the fire. She sang in a sweet, innocent voice. After her song, Dorothy stood up and held her round belly. I am so full, she smiled. My tummy is swelling up with meat. Regi laughed softly at Dorothy's funny words. Dorothy looked up and saw Regi's beautiful smile. She smiles so much more now that Juan is here, Dorothy thought. Before him, we never smiled. Seeing Regi so happy made Dorothy feel warm inside. Her laugh feels like the warm fire, she thought. I hope my food digests fast so I can eat more meat. But then, Dorothy grew quiet. A dark feeling of uncertainty entered her small heart. She thought deeply about Juan. Who exactly is Juan? She wondered. Regi says he is her husband. But what is he to me? Her innocent thoughts turned into sad anxiety. Juan and Regi are not my real parents. Will they leave me behind, just like my real dad did? Will Juan only take Regi away? Dorothy looked down at the floor. Painful thoughts filled her tiny heart. The warm fire still burned. But she felt cold. What will happen to me? She worried. Later, Dorothy woke up from a short nap. She opened her eyes and looked around the quiet room. Where did everyone go? She whispered. Suddenly, a terrible memory flashed in her mind. It was a nightmare from her past. She remembered a cruel voice yelling at her. You useless girl. If you were a boy, you could work. But all you do is eat my food. It was a painful memory that still haunted her. Dorothy shook her head hard to make the bad thoughts go away. She quickly looked at the kitchen table. The meat is safe, she sighed in relief. But then, she panicked again. Where is Regi? Suddenly, angry shouting came from outside. Don't you dare lie to me. The scary voice made Dorothy freeze. She trembled and peeked out the window. Her face turned pale white. I know those bad men, she thought in absolute terror. They used to come beat up my dad for money. Bad memories flooded her mind. After those men left, her dad would beat her and her foster mother. Dorothy shook with fear. She looked at Regi out in the yard. Is she going to be okay? Dorothy cried silently. Will they beat her half to death? 2. Outside, a cruel man with yellow hair grabbed Regi tightly by her hair. Answer me, he screamed. What is that smell? You stole our meat, didn't you? Regi shook her head, ignoring the sharp pain. No, I did not steal it. My husband hunted it, she cried. The yellow-haired man yelled in her face. What a lie. You think hunting is easy? A man with red hair spoke up coldly. Let's check inside the cabin. Let's see what she is hiding. Regi panicked. No, please. My husband really hunted it. I am not lying. She begged desperately. The bad men did not care. They threw Rigi roughly onto the hard dirt. Then, they forcefully entered the house. As soon as they stepped inside, their greedy eyes saw the giant wolf skin. It is huge. The yellow-haired man gasped in shock, his face filled with greed. We can sell this for so much money. We struck gold. He turned to the other men. Search the whole place. Do not miss anything. One man looked around and shouted happily, Hey, I found fresh meat. Under the bed, little Dorothy hid in the dark. She was shaking uncontrollably, trying not to make a single sound. One of the men looked at the wolf skin again. Did that giant bastard actually hunt a wolf? He whispered in disbelief. Right at that exact moment, Rigi rushed into the house. She screamed desperately at them. No. Do not touch that. That belongs to us. Their leader, a man with messy yellow hair, looked at Rigi with a mocking smile. Look at her now, he sneered. Not long ago, she wouldn't even dare look us in the eye. The others laughed. One of them, Koparson, suddenly shoved Rigi with all his strength. She lost her balance and crashed onto the wooden floor. More laughter echoed through the cabin. She's acting brave now that she has a husband, another man mocked. She thinks someone can protect her. Rigi slowly tried to get up, her hands shaking. As she lifted her head, her eyes briefly moved toward the space beneath the bed. Hidden in the darkness was little Dorothy. For a split second, panic flashed across Rigi's face. If these men found the child, they would never leave her alone. She quickly looked away, pretending she hadn't seen anything. She couldn't let them notice where Dorothy was hiding. Under the bed, Dorothy pressed both hands over her mouth to stop herself from making a sound. Her tiny body trembled with fear. She closed her eyes tightly, praying the men would leave without finding her. The yellow-haired man continued laughing. Do you really think your life has changed? He asked Rigi. Do you think your new husband can save you? One of the men hesitated. What if the mountain guardian finds out? The leader waved the concern away. He doesn't understand our language. As long as nobody tells him, we're safe. The group laughed again. They knew the guardian was important to the village, but greed and cruelty mattered more to them than common sense. Finally, the leader grabbed Rigi's arm and pulled her toward the door. We're taking her to the forest, he ordered. The rest of you search the house. Rigi fought desperately. She pulled back, trying to stay inside the cabin near Dorothy. The man leaned close, his eyes cold and threatening. If you tell your husband, he whispered, we'll return tonight and burn this cabin to the ground. Everything you own will disappear. The threat froze her. She stopped struggling. The men dragged her into the forest while Dorothy remained hidden inside, listening to every step until the voices faded. The cabin became painfully quiet. After several moments, Dorothy slowly crawled out from beneath the bed. Tears streamed down her face as fear overwhelmed her. What if Rigi never comes back? She thought. She wanted to scream, but she covered her mouth instead. What if the men were still outside? Curled into a tiny ball on the floor, she cried softly. Juan, she whispered between sobs, please come home. Not far away, Juan was walking back after a long day's work. His body was exhausted, and all he wanted was to return home to his family. An elderly villager stopped him to thank him for helping the community. Juan smiled politely. Then, everything changed. A faint sound reached his ears. It was Dorothy crying. His face instantly hardened. Dorothy only cried like that when something was terribly wrong. Without another word, Juan sprinted toward the cabin. He moved through the forest with incredible speed, his heart pounding as fear filled his mind. When he reached the forest clearing, he immediately understood what had happened. Rigi was surrounded by the men. Juan didn't hesitate. His fist slammed into the red-haired man, knocking him unconscious with a single punch. Before the others could react, Juan drove his knee into another attacker wearing a wolf hide, sending him crashing to the ground. Then his eyes settled on the yellow-haired leader. Juan grabbed him around the waist and threw him violently onto the ground. His anger exploded. Punch after punch landed as months of frustration poured out. He wasn't fighting for revenge alone. He was protecting the people he loved. Deep inside, Juan hated how cruel people could become. He understood that if evil was allowed to continue unchecked, it would only grow stronger. He wanted these men to remember this day forever. When he finally stepped back, silence filled the forest. A dark determination surrounded him so strongly that everyone nearby froze. No one dared move. The yellow-haired man spotted a chance when Juan briefly turned away. He grabbed a weapon and charged from behind. But Juan was faster. He caught the attack before it landed. This time, there was no kindness left in his eyes. He was ready to end the fight permanently. Stop! An old man's voice echoed through the forest. The village elder hurried between them. "Look at your daughter," he shouted. "She's terrified." Juan turned. Standing nearby was Dorothy. She was crying uncontrollably, her small body shaking with fear. The sight instantly broke through his anger. The darkness in his eyes disappeared. His expression softened as he looked at the frightened little girl. Rigi watched everything in silence. She had always known Juan as a gentle, quiet man. She had never imagined he could become so frightening when protecting his family. For a brief moment, the violence reminded her of her first husband, whose anger had only brought pain. Fear crept into her heart. What if Juan became the same? Then she looked into his eyes. There was no hatred, no cruelty, only worry, only love. He looked more concerned that she was frightened than proud of defeating the men. Slowly, Juan walked toward her. He softly called her name. Rigi lowered her eyes. Her hands were still trembling. She couldn't understand why this man cared so deeply for someone like her. She believed she had nothing left to offer anyone. Yet Juan treated her as though she were the most precious person in the world. She wanted to thank him. She wanted to tell him she wasn't afraid. She wanted him to know he had saved her. But they didn't share the same language. Words weren't enough. Instead, Rigi slowly reached out her hand. Very softly, she whispered his name. When their hands touched, warmth spread through her body. The fear that had filled her heart slowly disappeared. The memories of the cruel men faded. For the first time in a long time, she truly felt safe. Tears filled her eyes as gratitude overwhelmed her. She finally understood something she had never believed was possible. As long as Juan was beside her, she would never have to face the world alone again. For the first time in her life, she finally felt like she had found a real home. Slowly looked toward Rigi, who was still holding his hand tightly. In a gentle voice, he softly called her name. Rigi, the sound of his voice broke the last bit of strength she had left. Tears filled her eyes, and before she could stop herself, she stepped forward and wrapped both arms around him. She held him tightly, unable to hide her emotions any longer. Juan was surprised for a moment, but then he gently hugged her back. "Thank you," he said quietly. Those simple words confused Rigi even more. Why is he thanking me? She wondered. He's the one who saved me. If anyone should be grateful, it should be me. A short distance away, Dorothy watched everything in silence. Unlike Rigi, she wasn't relieved. She was terrified. Her face had turned pale, and her small body continued trembling. Even though the danger was over, the frightening images refused to leave her mind. Rigi soon noticed Dorothy standing alone. Dorothy. Without hesitation, she ran toward the little girl. Juan stayed where he was. He knew this was something only the two of them needed to share, so he quietly gave them space. When Rigi reached Dorothy, she knelt beside her. "Are you all right?" Before Dorothy could answer, Rigi noticed her whole body shaking. The little girl looked as if she might collapse at any moment. Inside Dorothy's mind, painful memories kept repeating. She remembered asking Juan for help. Then she remembered seeing his huge fists strike the attackers. The sight had frightened her more than she wanted to admit. It reminded her of something she had tried so hard to forget. She remembered her stepmother. She remembered Rigi after being beaten by her former husband. Their faces had been covered with dark bruises, swollen and broken. Those memories filled Dorothy with fear. What if that happens to me one day? The thought alone made tears roll down her cheeks. But another memory immediately followed. Don't cry. If you cry, you'll only get beaten more. Those cruel words had been repeated so many times during her childhood that they had become part of her heart. Even now, she tried to stop herself from crying. With a trembling voice, Dorothy finally spoke. I'm sorry." Rigi looked at her with confusion. "I hid under the bed instead of helping you." Fresh tears rolled down Dorothy's face. "I was scared. Please don't hate me. Please don't leave me alone like everyone else." She lowered her head, believing she had failed Rigi when she needed her most. But before she could say anything more, Rigi pulled her into a warm hug. "What are you saying?" She whispered gently. "When I looked under the bed earlier, I saw you." Dorothy looked up in surprise. "I pretended not to notice because I didn't want those men to find you." Rigi gently stroked Dorothy's hair. "You did nothing wrong. You were only trying to stay safe. There is nothing for you to apologize for." Dorothy stared at her with tear-filled eyes. "Really?" Rigi smiled warmly. "Of course. You were scared. Anyone would have been. But everything is all right now." She gently wiped Dorothy's tears away. "Papa is here." Dorothy blinked in confusion. "Papa? My father is already dead." The word didn't make sense to her. Rigi smiled kindly. "Do you know who Juan is?" Your husband," Dorothy answered quietly. "That's right. And since I'm your mother now, that makes Juan your papa too." Dorothy froze. She slowly turned toward the man standing outside. "He is my father?" Rigi nodded. "Yes, but he's different. He isn't someone who hurts us. He's someone who protects us." Those words touched something deep inside Dorothy's heart. For the first time in her life, the word father didn't make her feel afraid. She looked at Juan again. "So, the reason he fought those bad men was because he's my papa?" Rigi smiled. "Exactly. He protected both of us because we're his family." Dorothy quietly repeated the word in her heart. Papa. The more she thought about it, the warmer she felt inside. She remembered everything Juan had done since meeting her. He never hit her. He carried her when she was tired. He shared his food with her. He held her close whenever she felt afraid. He even gave her a name. No one had ever treated her so kindly before. A bright smile slowly spread across her face. Unable to stop herself, she suddenly ran outside. "Papa! Papa!" She called out happily as she rushed toward Juan. Hearing the voice, Juan turned around. The moment he saw Dorothy running toward him with sparkling eyes, his expression softened completely. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms. Although he couldn't understand every word she was saying, he understood her feelings. He gently patted her head with a warm smile. Then he suddenly paused. A strange smell reached him. After a second, he realized what had happened. Dorothy had become so emotional that she had accidentally wet herself. Juan couldn't help smiling. Poor little Dorothy looked far too happy to even notice. "I should change her clothes before she catches a cold," he thought. Just then, Rigi walked over. Juan naturally wrapped one arm around her as well. For the first time, the three of them stood together like a real family, holding each other in a peaceful embrace after everything they had endured. While Juan and Rigi were holding Dorothy, the little girl suddenly looked past them, her eyes lit up with excitement. The meat, she shouted. Before either of them could react, Dorothy slipped out of Juan's arms and ran toward the place where the attackers had fallen. Juan and Rigi exchanged confused looks before following her. Dorothy stopped beside a large basket filled with meat. Without thinking twice, she bent down and grabbed it with both hands, trying with all her strength to lift it. The basket barely moved. It was much too heavy for such a small child. Even so, Dorothy refused to give up. She clenched her teeth and kept pulling with all the strength she had. Little by little, the basket finally began to rise. Juan stared at her in disbelief. He couldn't help smiling. Her love for meat is unbelievable, he thought. Seeing her struggle, Juan quickly walked over and effortlessly picked up the heavy basket. Dorothy looked at him with sparkling eyes. To her, he looked like the strongest person in the entire world. Watching the admiration on her face made Juan chuckle to himself. Becoming a hero in a child's eyes is surprisingly simple, he thought. Sometimes all it takes is carrying a basket of meat. Rigi smiled as she watched them together. "Bring the meat inside," she called. "And take Dorothy with you. It's not safe to stay out here." Juan nodded. The three of them returned to the cabin together. Compared to the terrifying events outside, the little home now felt warm, peaceful, and full of hope. After putting everything away, Juan quietly stepped back outside. The moment he closed the door behind him, the warmth disappeared from his face. His eyes became cold again. The three attackers were still lying on the ground, groaning in pain. Part of Juan wanted to end everything right there. If those men stayed alive, they might return someday. If that happened, Rigi and Dorothy would be in danger again. His fists slowly tightened. The anger burning inside him hadn't disappeared at all. He wanted to make sure those men would never hurt anyone again. Just as he took a step forward, the village elder quickly stood in his way. "You mustn't kill them," the old man said firmly. Juan looked at him in silence. "So you're telling me to let them live?" The elder nodded. Juan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath and thought carefully. "If I kill them, the villagers may see me as a murderer. I could be arrested, or worse, become a slave again." That thought stopped him. His life no longer belonged only to himself. He had people waiting for him now. He couldn't make reckless decisions anymore. Juan slowly lowered his fists. Then he looked down at the defeated men with burning hatred. "You filthy cowards," he muttered. Inside his heart, however, he made a silent promise. "I'm sparing you today because I have a family to protect. But I'll remember every one of your faces. If you ever threaten them again, I won't show mercy a second time." Although he chose not to kill them, his determination remained unshaken. After calming himself, Juan noticed the supplies scattered across the ground. There were tools, food, and other useful items. Throwing them away would only make survival harder. Life in the mountains was never easy. Every resource mattered. Juan gathered everything the attackers had left behind and carried it back toward the cabin. As he walked, he glanced through the open doorway. Inside, Dorothy was happily talking to Rigi while proudly showing off the basket of meat. Their laughter filled the little cabin. For the first time since he had met them, both of them looked truly safe. The sight instantly melted away the remaining anger inside him. A gentle smile slowly appeared on his face. Not long ago, Juan had believed he was completely alone in the world. He had already experienced the pain of losing the people he loved. That emptiness had nearly destroyed him. Now, things were different. Without even realizing it, Rigi and Dorothy had become his family. They had given his life a new purpose. As Juan stepped back inside the cabin carrying the supplies, he looked at the two people waiting for him. Dorothy laughed happily as she proudly guarded the precious basket of meat, while Rigi smiled with relief, knowing the nightmare had finally ended. Watching them together filled Juan's heart with quiet determination. He had already lost one family. He refused to let history repeat itself. No matter what dangers lay ahead, no matter how many enemies stood in his way, he would never allow anyone to hurt them again. From this day forward, Rigi and Dorothy were no longer alone. They had someone willing to stand between them and the entire world. And as Juan looked at his wife and daughter, he made a silent promise to himself. I couldn't protect the family I lost before, but this time will be different. No matter what happens, I will protect them with everything I have. Juan carefully brushed Rigi's hair away from her face as he examined the bruises left by the attack. His eyes were filled with worry. Every injury she carried reminded him that he had arrived too late. A heavy feeling settled in his heart. If only I knew healing magic, he thought. I could erase all of these wounds in an instant. The thought frustrated him. He hated feeling powerless when the people he cared about were suffering. Seeing the sadness in his eyes, Rigi gently reached up and placed her hand on his cheek. She smiled softly, silently telling him that she was all right. Then she did something unexpected. Using both hands, she gently pulled the corners of his mouth upward, encouraging him to smile. Juan blinked in surprise. Her small gesture was simple, but it warmed his heart. Before he realized it, he was smiling again. Without saying a word, Juan carefully lifted Rigi into his arms. She looked at him with wide, confused eyes. Embarrassed, Juan quickly explained, "The floor is cold. You shouldn't sit there." Rigi couldn't help smiling at his awkward excuse. As Juan looked closer, however, he suddenly froze. The bruises on her face, they were disappearing. He stared in disbelief. Only moments ago, the marks had been clearly visible, but now they were fading right before his eyes. His heart began racing. Could it be? He remembered all the strange magical training he had been practicing recently. Did it finally work? Excitement quickly replaced his worry. I can use healing magic. Unable to hide his happiness, Juan grinned from ear to ear. Meanwhile, Rigi simply stared at him, completely confused about why he had suddenly become so cheerful. The following morning, life in the village continued as usual. Not everyone, however, was happy about the mountain guardian. A woman angrily kicked a rooster wandering near her feet. "Has that idiot completely lost his mind?" she shouted. "He even gave my precious cloth to that mountain guardian." Standing beside her, the village chief remained calm. "Does it really upset you that much?" She turned toward him with an angry expression. "I saved that fabric for 10 years. There was no reason to hand it over." "I know," the chief replied. "But we didn't have much choice." His expression became serious. "If more people get injured or die, this year's harvest will be ruined." The woman crossed her arms. "So that's worth giving away something I've protected for a decade?" The village chief smiled quietly. "You only see today's loss. I'm looking at tomorrow's profit." His eyes narrowed as he remembered what he had witnessed the previous day. When Juan first arrived, he had several serious wounds from beast attacks. Yet only a short time later, those injuries had almost completely healed. The speed was impossible. At that moment, everything finally made sense. Gus was right, he muttered. The mountain guardian isn't an ordinary man. He's a healing mage. The realization made his heart race. Healing mages were incredibly rare. Even wealthy nobles desperately searched for people with such abilities. If the royal family discovered someone like Juan, they would pay an enormous fortune to obtain him. A greedy smile slowly spread across the chief's face. "This could change my life. I won't remain a simple village chief forever." Looking around to make sure nobody was listening, he lowered his voice. "Fortunately, these villagers know nothing about healing magic. If rumors spread, nobles or guilds will take him away before I have a chance to profit." After thinking for a moment, he nodded to himself. For now, only old Gus can know the truth. While Gus continued watching over the mountain guardian, the village chief planned to secretly search for influential nobles, willing to pay an enormous price for a healer as talented as Juan. After making his decision, the village chief turned to his wife. "Try to become friends with the mountain guardian's wife," he said. She frowned. "Why?" According to Gus, the guardian learns incredibly fast. He's smarter than he looks. The chief's expression grew cautious. "If we're careless, he could discover that we've been secretly taking some of the Lord's supplies. If that happens, we'll be the ones in trouble." A sly smile crossed his face. "Besides, everyone says he's deeply attached to his new wife. If you become close to her, we might be able to buy rabbit pelts from them much more cheaply." His wife thought for a moment before nodding. "Fine. There aren't many women in this village for me to spend time with anyway." After she walked away, the village chief stared into the fire. "We should also return some of the things we took from their cabin." He sighed quietly. "Compared to the mountain guardians we've had before, this one is completely different. If we make the wrong move now, he'll become a problem later." He tossed another piece of wood into the fire. Sometimes you have to sacrifice a little to gain something much greater. A few days later, peace had returned to Juan's cabin. Warm morning sunlight slipped through the wooden walls as Juan prepared to leave for another day of hunting. While getting ready, he looked over at Rigi. She was happily sorting through the gifts the village chief had sent earlier that morning. Bright pieces of cloth and useful supplies covered the table. A smile appeared on Juan's face. "She's so happy." He watched her carefully organize every item with childlike excitement. It made him laugh quietly. She wasn't even this excited when the bruises on her face disappeared. Seeing Rigi enjoy such simple things reminded Juan of something important. Happiness didn't always come from great achievements. Sometimes it came from the smallest blessings. Whenever he watched her smile, he felt his own worries disappear. "Rigi teaches me how to appreciate life," he thought. "That's one of the reasons I love her so much." To Juan, she had become more precious than anything else. She wasn't simply his wife anymore. She had become the center of his world. After gathering his hunting gear, Juan walked toward the door. "I'm leaving now," he said. As always, Rigi happily repeated his words in her own adorable way before waving goodbye. The two exchanged warm smiles, completely lost in their own little world. Only after several moments did Juan finally leave the cabin. Not long afterward, Juan met old Gus. Today's plan was simple. They were going rabbit hunting. But instead of feeling excited, Juan looked troubled. "Can I really kill a rabbit?" It wasn't hunting that bothered him. It was Dorothy. For some reason, every time he imagined a rabbit, Dorothy's face immediately appeared in his mind. Her innocent smile, her soft expression, even Rigi reminded him of a gentle little rabbit. Juan rubbed his forehead and sighed. "I'm supposed to be a hunter. Why am I becoming soft?" No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the image from his mind. How am I supposed to kill something that reminds me of my own family? He let out another helpless sigh. "If we do find one, I hope it's the ugliest rabbit in the entire forest." As Juan and Gus walked deeper beneath the towering trees, the forest became quieter. The sunlight barely reached the ground. Everything felt strangely still. Then, something moved inside a thick patch of bushes. Juan stopped. Hidden within the shadows, two glowing crimson eyes slowly opened. Whatever was hiding there had been silently watching them all along, and it wasn't taking its eyes off them. Juan stepped outside the cabin and took a deep breath. The cool morning air felt refreshing, and the peaceful silence gave him a chance to relax before another busy day. He stretched his arms and looked around with satisfaction. "I've already carried the water and chopped enough firewood," he said to himself. "There's still some time before I leave." After thinking for a moment, an idea came to mind. Maybe I should practice my magic. Ever since arriving in this strange world, using healing magic had become much easier. Small cuts, bruises, and other minor injuries disappeared with little effort. But there was one type of magic he still couldn't control: fire magic. He remembered the battle with the giant wolf. During that desperate fight, flames had appeared in his hand without warning. Ever since then, he had tried countless times to repeat it, but nothing had happened. Why did it only work that day? He wondered. Was it because my life was in danger? The theory made sense. Taking a slow breath, Juan closed his eyes and focused on the flow of magical energy inside his body. He tried to recreate the same feeling he had experienced during that life-or-death battle. Slowly, he raised one hand. Firestorm. Nothing happened. The morning remained completely silent. Not even the smallest spark appeared. Juan looked at his empty palm and sighed. I wasn't expecting a miracle anyway. Even so, he felt disappointed. Healing magic was useful, but it wasn't exciting. It didn't create bright lights or dramatic explosions. Dorothy barely showed any interest whenever he used it. He smiled to himself. I really wanted to show her some fire magic. Just as he finished speaking, crack. A tiny spark suddenly appeared above his hand. Juan's eyes widened. Huh? The spark flickered once before growing into a tiny flame. For a moment, he simply stared at it in disbelief. It worked. A huge smile spread across his face. He had finally succeeded. The cabin door slowly opened. Dorothy walked outside, rubbing her sleepy eyes. She looked as though she had only just woken up. At first, she didn't notice anything unusual. Then her eyes landed on Juan's hand. She froze. Her sleepy expression disappeared instantly. Dad's hand is on fire. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. Dad is using fire magic. Juan smiled awkwardly. Easy there, Dorothy. You're standing a little too close. But she wasn't listening. She was completely fascinated by the tiny flame. Without wasting another second, she spun around and ran back inside the cabin. Mum, come quickly. Dad can use fire magic. Juan couldn't help laughing. Compared to his own reaction, Dorothy looked far more excited than he was. Only moments later, Regi hurried outside. What happened? Then she saw the flame. Her eyes grew wide with surprise. Juan, fire is coming out of your hand. Dorothy proudly pointed toward him. I told you, Dad can use fire magic. Juan looked at the two of them. Regi stared at the flame in amazement. Dorothy looked ready to cheer. Their reactions made him smile. Maybe the flame was tiny, but to them, it was incredible. I guess I need to practice more, he thought. One day I'll show them real fire magic. For now, though, even this tiny flame was proof that he was getting stronger. At least, he laughed, I can use it to start campfires. Suddenly, Regi remembered something. Oh. Without saying another word, she hurried back inside. Dorothy immediately chased after her. Mom, wait for me. Juan watched the two of them disappear. A moment ago they had been amazed. Now they had already forgotten about him. Standing alone, he looked at the tiny flame floating above his hand. I worked hard for this, he muttered. Then another problem occurred to him. Wait, how do I turn it off? He stared at the flame. It kept burning peacefully. He waved his hand. Nothing happened. He shook his arm several times. Still nothing. The little flame refused to disappear. Juan scratched his head. This is becoming embarrassing. After trying everything he could think of, he finally gave up. It'll probably go out by itself. The moment he finished speaking, poof, the flame disappeared. Juan blinked. Seriously, he stared at his empty hand before letting out a helpless laugh. The magic in this world is definitely strange. Shaking his head, he walked back toward the cabin, completely unaware that the day ahead would become another important step in his journey. When Juan entered the cabin, he found Dorothy staring into a wooden bucket with a disappointed look on her face. He walked over and peeked inside. Only a few small pieces of meat remained. No wonder she looked so upset. Dorothy sighed deeply. "We don't have much meat left." Rigi couldn't help laughing at the little girl's dramatic expression. Juan smiled and crouched beside her. "Don't worry." Dorothy immediately looked up with hopeful eyes. "I'll bring home a rabbit today." Her gloomy face instantly brightened. Before she could say anything else, a familiar voice called from outside. "Juan." Juan turned toward the doorway. Old Gus was waiting outside with his hunting gear already prepared. "So you're ready?" the old hunter asked. Juan grabbed his bow, arrows, and travel bag. "It's time." As he walked toward the door, Dorothy ran over to him. "Have a safe trip, Dad." Juan smiled warmly and gently patted her head. "Be a good girl while I'm gone." Rigi stepped closer. "You be careful too." Juan nodded before leaning forward and giving her a gentle kiss. Dorothy watched them carefully. After a few seconds, she raised her hand. "Me too." Juan laughed. "You want one as well?" She nodded seriously. Without hesitation, Juan crouched down and kissed her on the cheek. Dorothy immediately smiled with satisfaction, as though she had completed an important mission. Juan and old Gus headed deep into the mountains. The journey wasn't just a hunt. It was another lesson. As they walked, Gus pointed out useful plants, different kinds of trees, and animal tracks hidden across the forest floor. "That wood burns longer," he explained while pointing toward a large tree. A little farther ahead, he stopped beside several small droppings. "Rabbit tracks. They passed through here recently." Juan listened carefully. Everything around him was new. Every lesson increased his chances of surviving in this unfamiliar world. After walking for some time, Gus suddenly raised one hand. "Stop." Juan froze instantly. The old hunter silently pointed ahead. There, Juan carefully followed his finger. Standing in a grassy clearing was a rabbit. At least, it looked like one. Juan frowned. "This isn't the kind of rabbit I remember." The creature was much larger than any rabbit from Earth. It stood nearly waist-high and hopped with long, powerful legs, making it look more like a small kangaroo. Juan couldn't help smiling. So even rabbits are different in this world. Gus quietly nodded. "This is the perfect prey for your first hunt." Juan kept watching the animal. "It doesn't seem dangerous." "Exactly. Compared to the wolf you fought before, this creature can't fight back." The old hunter smiled as old memories returned. "I still remember my own first hunt." Then his expression became serious. He handed Juan the bow. "This one is yours. I'm only here to teach." Juan slowly nocked an arrow. Just before he aimed, Gus gave him one final instruction. "Shoot its leg first." Juan immediately looked confused. "The leg? If I do that, it won't die. It'll only suffer." Gus calmly nodded. "That's right." Juan remained silent. The answer made him uncomfortable. Gus looked toward the distant mountains. "Hunting isn't kind. First you learn to hit a still target. Then you learn to hit a moving one." He looked directly into Juan's eyes. "This isn't cruelty. It's survival. The mountains belong to no one. Today, luck may be on your side. Tomorrow, it may belong to the beast. If you want to return home alive, you must learn every lesson the mountains teach." Juan slowly tightened his grip on the bow. He finally understood. Old Gus wasn't teaching him how to kill. He was teaching him how to survive. At that very moment, the rabbit suddenly lifted its head. Its ears twitched. For a brief second, Juan was reminded of the day he first arrived in this strange world. He remembered the cage, the fear, the feeling of being completely powerless. Those memories flashed through his mind before disappearing again. He took a slow breath. I still know almost nothing about this world, but Gus is trying to keep me alive. Juan raised his bow. Everything around him became silent. The wind stopped. The leaves stood perfectly still. Even the sounds of birds disappeared. The rabbit remained completely unaware of the danger. Juan steadied his breathing. Then he released the string. The arrow shot forward like lightning, racing toward its target. For one brief moment, the entire forest seemed to hold its breath.
Juan practiced hunting with old Gus. Following Gus's instructions, he shot a rabbit with his bow. The arrow hit the rabbit's back leg, leaving it badly injured. The rabbit screamed and struggled to escape. Juan felt shocked because it was his first successful shot. Instead of telling Juan to finish the rabbit quickly, old Gus gave him a strange order. He told Juan to shoot the rabbit again and aim for its front leg. Juan was confused. The rabbit was already suffering, and one final shot could end its pain. He could not understand why Gus wanted him to make the animal suffer even more. Juan watched the rabbit crawl across the ground while crying in pain. He felt sorry for it, but then he thought about Reggie and Dorothy waiting for him at home. He reminded himself that he was learning to hunt so he could feed and protect his family. Ignoring his emotions, he raised his bow and fired another arrow. It hit the rabbit, ending the lesson. Juan accepted that sometimes survival required making difficult choices, even if others thought he was cruel. Later, Juan and old Gus rested under the trees. Juan admitted that he could have killed the rabbit with his first shot, but had instead caused it unnecessary pain. He realized hunting was not heroic. It was simply a way to survive. He promised himself never to forget how heavy that moment felt because he did not want killing to become easy or normal. Old Gus then handed Juan a heavy sack filled with rabbits. He told Juan they were his reward for completing the lesson. Juan was surprised and grateful because the meat would feed Reggie and Dorothy for several days. Soon they spotted one last rabbit standing in a nearby field. Juan reached for his bow, but stopped. Instead of killing it, he had a better idea. Rabbits reproduce quickly, so raising one at home could provide a steady source of food in the future. He decided to catch it alive instead. Gus approved of the decision and gave Juan another sack. After carefully chasing it, Juan successfully captured the rabbit without harming it. Later, Juan visited old Gus's house while carrying the live rabbit. As he rested, he thought about his old life. Before meeting Reggie and Dorothy, he had lived alone without purpose. Now he finally had a family worth protecting, and that gave his life meaning. While looking around Gus's house, Juan noticed a wooden board covered with strange symbols. He realized they were written words from this world. Excited, he asked Gus to teach him how to read. Gus was surprised because most people in the mountains had no interest in learning. He found several old books and papers, placed them on the table, and patiently began teaching Juan. Juan eagerly copied the letters, determined to learn. As Gus watched Juan study, he remembered his own past. Long ago, he had learned to read because he dreamed of earning military honors and serving a noble family. Those dreams had never come true, leaving him with many regrets. Gus then thought about the quiet mountains outside. The silence worried him because experienced hunters knew that spring often brought goblins out of hiding. He believed a goblin settlement was hidden somewhere nearby. His injured leg hurt more every day, reminding him that he was growing weaker. Before his body completely failed, he promised himself he would destroy the goblins. That evening, Juan returned home. Dorothy happily ran to him and hugged him tightly. She proudly showed him the dress Reggie had been making for her. Juan praised the beautiful work before placing the heavy sack on the floor. Dorothy suddenly noticed the sack moving. Curious, Reggie untied it, and a rabbit burst out, racing around the cabin. Everyone watched in surprise. Then Dorothy noticed something strange. The rabbit had a small pair of horns growing from its head. Juan and Reggie stared in silence. The rabbit they thought was ordinary turned out to be a mysterious horned creature, leaving everyone wondering what it really was.
Dorothy couldn't take her eyes off the strange rabbit. "It's so cute," she said happily as she stared at its tiny horns. Reggie quickly stepped in front of her. "Dorothy, don't get too close." The little girl tilted her head in confusion. "Why?" "It has horns," Reggie explained. "We don't know if it's dangerous." Even though she warned Dorothy to stay back, Reggie carefully walked toward the rabbit herself. "I'll catch it." Dorothy watched with excitement. Wow. Reggie slowly reached out with both hands, expecting the rabbit to jump away at any moment. Instead, the rabbit didn't move. A second later, it was quietly sitting in her hands. Reggie blinked in surprise. "I actually caught it? That didn't seem right. Wild rabbits were supposed to be quick. This one wasn't even trying to escape." Then, she noticed something. The rabbit's body was shaking. Looking closer, she saw several wounds hidden beneath its fur. "It isn't scared. It's injured." Dorothy's smile disappeared immediately. "The bunny is hurt?" Her cheerful voice became filled with worry. "What should we do?" She quickly looked toward Juan. "Dad, can you help the bunny?" Juan gently took the rabbit from Reggie's hands and carefully examined its injuries. There were several cuts across its body. Without saying a word, he raised one hand. A soft golden light gathered around his fingers. Reggie and Dorothy watched quietly. The gentle glow slowly surrounded the rabbit. Little by little, the cuts began disappearing. The trembling stopped. Within moments, the rabbit looked perfectly healthy again. Dorothy's eyes sparkled. "The bunny is all better." She looked at Juan with complete admiration. "Dad, you're amazing." Then she smiled even wider. "Really, really amazing." Without hesitation, she threw her arms around him. Reggie smiled warmly as she watched the scene unfold. Juan couldn't hide his happiness. Hearing their praise filled him with pride, and a faint blush appeared on his face. For a few peaceful moments, he simply enjoyed being surrounded by the people he loved. As he bent down to place the rabbit on the floor, Dorothy suddenly stopped him. "Wait." She hurried inside and returned carrying a small woven basket. "Put the bunny in here." Juan smiled and gently placed the rabbit inside. Dorothy knelt beside the basket and softly patted the little animal. "I'll take good care of you. I promise I'll protect you." The rabbit quietly looked back at her, almost as if it understood. Juan and Reggie exchanged smiles. Seeing Dorothy care so deeply for such a tiny creature filled both of them with happiness. That night, the cabin was peaceful. Dorothy had fallen asleep beside her bed, with the rabbit's basket tucked safely against her chest. Meanwhile, Juan sat beside Reggie, practicing the written language of this world. She patiently helped him read and write each new letter. As Juan copied the characters onto paper, his thoughts slowly wandered. "People are never satisfied," he thought. "At first, I was simply grateful to survive." He remembered being dragged through the mountains like livestock after arriving in this strange world. Back then, survival had been his only wish. Then he found a home. After that, he expanded the cabin so Dorothy would have more space to play. Now, he wanted to learn how to read and write. A small smile appeared on his face. Life kept giving him new dreams. He glanced toward Reggie. Out of everything he had gained, she was the greatest gift of all. She had spent the entire day helping him study without a single complaint. Juan quietly noticed the tiredness on her face. "You've worked hard today," he said softly. Without waiting for an answer, he gently placed his hands on her shoulders. Riji jumped slightly in surprise. Then, Juan slowly began massaging her aching shoulders. She relaxed almost immediately. "Thank you," she whispered with a shy smile. His warm hands eased away the day's exhaustion. The room grew quiet again. Neither of them needed words. Simply sitting together like this was enough. For Juan, this peaceful evening felt more valuable than anything he had ever owned. The next morning, the village chief climbed into a carriage and began the long journey to the nearest city. As the wagon rattled along the rough road, he let out a tired sigh. "It takes almost a day and a half just to reach the city," he complained while rubbing his sore back. "I've only been traveling for a few hours, and my whole body already aches." His frustration quickly faded as thoughts of money filled his mind. "I've paid for the carriage, the trip, and an informant. This had better be worth it." A greedy smile slowly spread across his face. Most healing mages are weak and fragile. But that mountain guardian, he is completely different. The chief remembered Juan's enormous strength and unbelievable healing ability. "If I sell information about someone like him," he thought, "I could earn more than a dozen gold coins. That amount of money could change his entire life." As the carriage continued moving, two passengers nearby began discussing recent rumors. "I heard the neighboring kingdom summoned a hero," one man said. "The temple in our country tried several times too," the other replied. "No one knows if they actually succeeded. What if the enemy's hero is fake?" The second man laughed. "Who knows? Heroes only exist in old stories. If someone is pretending, the truth will come out eventually." The conversation made the village chief frown. He had almost forgotten that their village was close to enemy territory. If war breaks out, he thought, everything will become much more dangerous. He clenched his fists. "I need to sell this information, collect my reward, and return home before anything happens." Back at the cabin, Dorothy happily spent the morning with her new rabbit. She crouched beside its basket and smiled. "You must be bored. I'll play with you." Just then, Riji walked into the room. "Dorothy, don't eat the bunny." Dorothy looked at her in complete confusion. "Mum, I'm not going to eat it." Riji pointed toward her mouth. "Then wipe away the drool first." Dorothy quickly rubbed her face before bursting into laughter. "Oh, I almost forgot. I need to feed the bunny." She grabbed some food and hurried outside. As she stepped into the yard, she suddenly noticed Juan working nearby. He was building a wooden fence around part of the property. "We already have a house," she wondered. "So why is Dad making a fence?" A moment later, she remembered the rabbit. Oh, right. She ran toward the enclosure carrying its food. Inside were several large rabbits Juan had brought home from hunting. Dorothy looked at them for a moment before laughing. "They're still big and ugly." Then she carefully placed food in front of each one before kneeling beside her favorite little horned rabbit. "I'm busy today," she whispered. "So you have to eat nicely by yourself." She divided the food carefully so every rabbit received the same amount. Watching them eat made her smile with satisfaction. Then another exciting thought popped into her head. Maybe I can use magic too. Her imagination immediately began racing. If I really have magic, I'll show Dad later. She giggled happily, already imagining how surprised he would be. Inside the cabin, Riji sat quietly beside several wolf pelts and the preserved head of the giant wolf Juan had defeated. She looked at them with mixed emotions. The merchant caravan should arrive soon. If we don't have enough valuable pelts, we won't be able to buy everything we need. Her eyes rested on the beautiful wolf skin. This was Juan's first hunt. I really don't want to sell it. But reality quickly returned. Juan still needed proper clothes. He needed shoes. The cabin needed more buckets, cooking pots, and supplies for the future. After thinking everything through, Rigi sighed. One rabbit pelt won't be enough. With renewed determination, she tied back her hair, picked up a pair of scissors, and began preparing the pelts for trade. Sometime later, the front door opened. "I'm home." Juan's familiar voice filled the cabin. "Dad." Dorothy immediately ran into his arms. Rigi smiled warmly. "Welcome back." Juan looked toward her, then suddenly stopped. His eyes widened in complete surprise. Dorothy pointed dramatically at her mother and shouted with excitement, "Dad." "Mom's hair is gone." Juan stood frozen, staring at Rigi's brand new haircut, wondering what had happened while he was away. Juan stood frozen as he looked at Rigi. For a brief moment, he almost didn't recognize her. Her long hair, which had always framed her face so beautifully, was gone. It had been cut short, completely changing her appearance. Beside them, Dorothy walked around her mother with a puzzled expression. "Mom," she asked, "where did your hair go?" Rigi smiled awkwardly. "I cut it." Dorothy's face immediately fell. "But your long hair was so pretty." Hearing those words, Juan finally understood what had happened. Rigi hadn't cut her hair because she wanted a new look. She had sold it. In this world, long hair wasn't just part of a woman's beauty. It was something many poor families sold whenever they desperately needed money. She had sacrificed it for their future. Juan slowly walked toward her. Without saying anything, he gently cupped her cheek. "I'm sorry, Rigi," she blinked in confusion. Why was he apologizing? Most husbands wouldn't think twice about something like this. To them, hair was simply another resource that could be exchanged for money. But Juan wasn't worried about the money. He was worried about her. Looking into his gentle eyes, Rigi suddenly felt tears gathering. She wasn't crying because she regretted cutting her hair. She was crying because someone cared enough to feel sorry for her. Unable to hold back her emotions, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Juan. She buried her face against his chest. "My heart feels so warm," she thought. Juan quietly returned the hug, holding her close without saying another word. Watching them nearby, Dorothy smiled from ear to ear. Seeing her parents happy made her happier than anything else. A little later, the three of them headed toward the nearby town. Dorothy happily sat on Juan's shoulders while Rigi walked beside them. "Mom, you should ride up here too." Dorothy laughed. Rigi smiled and shook her head. "If I climbed up there too, your poor father would collapse." Everyone laughed. The peaceful journey felt more like a family outing than a trip for business. When they finally reached town, they were greeted by crowded streets filled with merchants, travelers, children, and adventurers. People shouted from every direction, trying to attract customers to their stalls. Juan quietly looked around. The lively streets reminded him of the world he had left behind. He remembered walking through crowded shopping streets completely alone. But things were different now. He glanced at Rigi walking beside him. Then he looked up at Dorothy laughing on his shoulders. A warm smile spread across his face. So this is what it feels like to walk through town with a family. Before he could enjoy the moment any longer, Dorothy suddenly pointed toward a nearby stall. "Dad, I want to see that." Juan carefully lowered her to the ground. She ran over excitedly, where she noticed a young boy standing nearby. The two children looked at each other curiously. After several seconds, Dorothy tilted her head. "You look like him." The boy blinked. "Like who?" Nearby, Juan scratched his head in confusion. Who exactly does she think he looks like? Meanwhile, Rigi approached a merchant and placed several rabbit pelts on his counter. The merchant carefully examined them before letting out an exaggerated sigh. Unfortunately, rabbit pelts aren't worth much these days. The market is flooded. Rigi looked disappointed. Oh, inside, however, the merchant was thinking something completely different. These pelts are excellent. The fur is thick, clean, and in perfect condition. If she believes me, I'll make a huge profit. Keeping a straight face, he offered her only a few cheap household goods. Just as Rigi began considering the deal, Juan stepped forward. The merchant finally noticed him. His confident smile disappeared instantly. Juan's massive figure towered over the counter. As the merchant reached for the pelts, Juan calmly grabbed his wrist. The man froze. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't pull his hand away. Juan looked him straight in the eye. "Rigi, let's leave. We'll sell them somewhere else." I can tell he's lying. The merchant immediately broke into a cold sweat. The merchant's confident smile disappeared the moment Juan said they would leave. Wait, he shouted, quickly pulling his hand back. Rigi looked at Juan in surprise. "The next town is very far away." Juan nodded calmly. "That's all right. The pelts are worth much more than he's offering. He was trying to cheat you." Only then did Rigi realize what had almost happened. Since she rarely left the mountains, she didn't know the real value of rabbit pelts. The merchant had planned to take advantage of that. Panic spread across the man's face. All right, he said quickly. "I'll make a better offer. I'll give you salt, a cooking pot, and a full set of men's clothes." Juan didn't even look interested. "Let's go," he said. Rigi nodded. Okay, seeing them actually turn away, the merchant hurried around the counter. "Please wait. Those are some of the finest rabbit pelts I've seen all week." He sighed in frustration. "I'll pay a fair price." Watching the giant man walk away, he muttered under his breath, "I almost lost an incredible deal." While the adults finished their business, Dorothy happily talked with the other children nearby. She proudly pointed toward Juan. "That's my dad. My dad is the strongest." Every time she said those words, her face lit up with pride. Soon, Rigi called out to her. "Dorothy, it's time to go home." Dorothy waved goodbye to the other children. "My dad," she said one last time before running back to her family. The trip home felt peaceful. The weather had turned colder, so Juan wrapped Dorothy inside his large coat while carrying her. Snuggled safely against his chest, she smiled happily. "It smells nice. It's warm. I feel safe. My super strong dad is protecting me." A moment later, she suddenly realized something. "Wait, why am I so warm?" She peeked outside the coat and laughed. "I'm hiding inside Dad's jacket." After walking a little farther, Dorothy suddenly remembered something important. "Dad, put me down. I have to feed the rabbits." Juan smiled and gently lowered her onto the ground. The little girl grabbed a bundle of fresh grass and ran toward the rabbit enclosure. "I'm coming. I brought your food." But as soon as she reached the fence, she stopped. The enclosure was empty. Every rabbit was gone. Dorothy stared in disbelief. Then tears slowly filled her eyes. The rabbits, they're gone. Unable to hold back her sadness, she burst into tears and ran back toward the house. Rigi immediately rushed over. "Dorothy, what happened?" "The rabbits. They disappeared." Juan walked over after hearing the crying. "What happened?" Dorothy wiped her eyes. "The rabbits are gone." Juan looked toward the empty enclosure. "So that's why you're crying." Before he could comfort her, he noticed something unexpected. Rigi was crying too. He looked at her in surprise. "Rigi, why are you crying?" She wiped away her tears. "They're gone. The rabbits are gone." Juan looked from Rigi to Dorothy. Both of them were crying over the missing rabbits. For a second, he didn't know what to say. Then he couldn't help laughing softly. Dorothy immediately pouted. "Dad, this isn't funny." Juan quickly raised his hands. "I'm sorry. I wasn't laughing at you." Inside, however, his heart felt incredibly warm. Watching the two of them care so deeply about something so small made him realize how much their family had changed. Not long ago, none of them would have cried over a rabbit. Now they laughed together, cried together, and shared every little joy and sadness. So this is what a real family feels like, Juan thought with a gentle smile. Far away in the mountains, the peaceful atmosphere ended. Old Gus crouched silently behind a massive boulder, carefully hiding his presence. Slowly, he peeked around the rock. Several goblins were moving through the forest below. He quietly watched them until his eyes settled on something hidden among the trees. A village. Wooden huts stood between the rocks, surrounded by watchtowers and guarded paths. Dozens of goblins walked from one building to another. At last, he had found what he had been searching for. A cold smile spread across his face. "So, this is where you've been hiding." His grip tightened around his weapon. The Goblin Village. Hidden behind a massive boulder, Old Gus silently watched the goblin settlement below. Dozens of goblins wandered through the camp, arguing, fighting, and pushing one another as they searched for food. Their numbers were far greater than he had expected. His grip tightened around his wooden staff. "I want to charge in and kill them all right now," he thought, but he quickly forced himself to stay calm. That would only get me killed. His experienced eyes carefully studied the settlement. The camp was overcrowded. Food was becoming scarce, and tensions were already rising among the goblins. A cold smile crossed his face. When they run out of food, and women, they'll eventually start killing each other. Old Gus understood these creatures better than most people. One goblin alone wasn't very dangerous. Compared to wolves and other monsters, they were actually quite weak. The real danger came from their numbers. "They never fight alone," he whispered. "They hunt in groups. And no matter how many die, they multiply faster than anyone can stop them." The thought filled him with disgust. He remembered the terrible stories he had heard over the years. Goblins raided villages, kidnapped women, and forced them to give birth until they eventually died. The memory made his jaw tighten. Spring was approaching. When that season arrived, the goblins would become even more aggressive. He couldn't allow that to happen. His thoughts slowly turned toward one person. Juan. A quiet sigh escaped his lips. "Every time he thanks me for teaching him, I feel guilty." Juan believed Gus was simply helping him become a hunter. But the old man had another reason. He wanted Juan to become strong enough to fight beside him. "There's no other choice. Together, we'll destroy that goblin village." Back at the cabin, the atmosphere couldn't have been more peaceful. Rigi had just woken from a short nap. Stretching lazily, she stepped outside. The moment she looked into the yard, her eyes widened. "Juan, you caught another rabbit." Juan smiled awkwardly. His mind immediately flashed back to the exhausting chase. The rabbit had been unbelievably fast. For hours he had chased it through bushes, over rocks, and across streams. More than once, it had escaped just when he thought he had caught it. "I wanted to bring it home alive, but after chasing it all day, I finally gave up." Looking at Rigi, however, he simply smiled. It wasn't that difficult. Rigi laughed. "You're amazing." She gently stroked the rabbit's soft fur. "So, should we preserve the meat?" Juan nodded. "Let's roast it too." Rigi blinked. She wasn't familiar with that word. Seeing her confused expression, Juan quickly corrected himself. "We'll preserve some and roast the rest." "Oh." Rigi smiled brightly. "I'll make it delicious." While she prepared the rabbit, Juan started a fire outside. A few moments later, he frowned. The flames were becoming weaker again. He looked down at his fingers. This fire magic is strange. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. As he focused on cooking, he suddenly felt magical energy gathering again. Whoosh! Bright flames burst from his fingertips. Juan jumped in surprise. Wait. Not so much. He quickly pulled his hand away before the rabbit burned. The fire disappeared just as suddenly as it had appeared. Juan stared at his hand. Why does it only work whenever it wants? Then he remembered the battle against the giant wolf. Back then, the fire hadn't appeared in his hand. It had appeared directly on the wolf. His eyes slowly widened. Wait, what if I'm thinking about this completely wrong? Maybe the fire wasn't created in his hand at all. Maybe he was casting it directly onto whatever he wanted to burn. Excited by the idea, Juan closed his eyes. He imagined the rabbit slowly roasting over a gentle fire. Not burning, not exploding, just cooking evenly from every side. A second later, soft orange flames quietly appeared around the rabbit itself. The magical fire wrapped around the meat without touching anything else. Golden fat slowly dripped onto the hot coals as the rich smell of roasted meat filled the air. Juan's mouth slowly opened. It worked. The rabbit rotated gently while the flames cooked every side perfectly. A huge smile spread across his face. I finally figured it out. For the first time since arriving in this world, Juan truly understood how his fire magic worked, and judging by the delicious smell filling the cabin, his family was about to enjoy the best meal they had ever tasted. A little while later, Juan carried the freshly roasted rabbit into the cabin. The rich aroma filled the entire room before anyone even saw the food. Dorothy's eyes immediately lit up. Wow! Rigi covered her mouth in surprise. It smells incredible. The rabbit had turned a beautiful golden brown, its crispy skin shining in the firelight. Juices slowly dripped from the meat, carrying the delicious scent of herbs and bamboo throughout the cabin. Dorothy tilted her head. Is that chicken? Juan laughed. No, without saying another word, he gently pulled the roasted rabbit apart into 2 equal portions and handed one piece to Rigi and the other to Dorothy. Here, the two looked at each other before carefully taking their first bite. The moment the meat touched their tongues, they froze. The outside was perfectly crispy, while the inside remained tender and juicy. Every bite was filled with the flavors of herbs, bamboo, and slow-roasted meat. Their eyes grew wide with surprise. It's so delicious. Dorothy happily stuffed another bite into her mouth, while Rigi smiled warmly, enjoying every piece. Juan quietly watched the meat. He had barely touched his own meal, yet somehow he already felt full. Seeing the 2 people he loved enjoying his cooking brought him more happiness than eating ever could. Maybe this is what people mean when they say love makes food taste better, he thought with a smile. Over the following days, Juan practiced his fire magic whenever he had free time. The more he trained, the easier it became to control. Eventually, he made another surprising discovery. He stretched out one hand toward a nearby tree. The trunk stood almost half a meter away. With a single thought, a small flame suddenly appeared directly on the bark. Juan smiled. So I don't have to create fire in my hand. I can create it directly on my target. The discovery excited him, but it also made him uneasy. If this works on trees, could it work on people too? The thought sent a chill through his body. That kind of power could become terrifying if it was used carelessly. After a moment, he shook his head. I'll never use it like that, unless I have no other choice. His eyes drifted toward the cabin. Inside, Rigi and Dorothy were laughing together. A gentle smile returned to his face. I only need enough power to protect my family. Thinking about everything that had happened since arriving in this strange world, Juan remembered the mysterious Santa Claus who had changed his life forever. He laughed quietly to himself. If I ever return home, I might actually hold a memorial service for Santa. The ridiculous thought made him laugh even harder. Just then, Dorothy's cheerful voice echoed from inside the cabin. "Dad." The bunny woke up. Juan hurried inside. The little horned rabbit was happily hopping around the room, while Dorothy followed closely behind. She carefully picked it up and smiled. "Mr. Bunny, today I'll show you our home." Without waiting for an answer, she proudly began giving the rabbit a tour. "This is our kitchen. It's the most important room because this is where Mum cooks delicious food." The rabbit twitched its nose. Dorothy nodded seriously, as though it had understood every word. Next, she walked over to one of the wooden walls. "And this is a wall." Juan couldn't stop smiling. She was explaining everything with complete sincerity. Finally, Dorothy carried the rabbit over to Rigi. Holding it up proudly, she said, "Mr. Bunny, I'd like you to meet someone very important. This is my mum. You must never forget her." Rigi's face instantly turned bright red with embarrassment. Just then, Juan stepped inside. Dorothy turned toward him with a huge smile. "Dad, Mr. Bunny is my junior disciple." Juan blinked. "Junior disciple? What does that mean?" Rigi looked just as confused. Before either of them could ask another question, Juan suddenly noticed the way Dorothy was proudly holding the rabbit close to Rigi. A strange thought entered his mind. His eyes slowly widened. "Wait, don't tell me." He quickly walked toward Rigi before carefully kneeling in front of her. His heart began pounding. Looking at her with nervous excitement, he gently reached toward her stomach. "Rigi, R.A.U." He swallowed hard. "Pregnant?" Rigi froze. Dorothy blinked in complete confusion. For a brief moment, the entire cabin fell silent as Juan nervously waited for an answer, completely misunderstanding what Dorothy had meant. Yuan looked at Ri with a very puzzled face. Ri saw his reaction and shook her head quickly. She told him it was not a baby. It was just a word she used. Yuan felt a bit confused. He let out a quiet sigh of relief. He thought it was still too early to have a child. He smiled a little bit. He wanted to have a child later. He wanted to live in a better place first. He wanted a home that was safe. He did not want his family to struggle to survive. He wanted a peaceful life for them. Suddenly, Dorothy tugged on his sleeve. She called him Daddy. Yuan looked down at her. She asked why he was on his knees. Yuan saw her happy smile. All his heavy thoughts went away. A gentle smile grew on his face. He wanted to build a strong bond with Dorothy. He wanted to give her a lot of love. She did not get much love in the past. He wanted to change that now. Dorothy lifted a small rabbit into the air. The rabbit had a horn. She said Yuan was making the same pose as the bunny. Yuan laughed at this. He looked at the rabbit closely. He noticed the horn had grown a lot. He found this rabbit a long time ago. Back then, he did not think much of it. This world has giant wolves and magic. A rabbit with a horn did not seem strange to him. Then, Yuan's smile went away. He wondered if it was okay to keep the rabbit. He had thought about getting rid of it many times. He thought about leaving it in the forest. He even thought about killing it. He was afraid it might become dangerous. He looked at Dorothy again. She was hugging the rabbit very tightly. She had a bright smile. She was very attached to the animal. Ri also wanted to keep it. So, Yuan gave up on his plan to get rid of it. He smiled to himself. The rabbit was very gentle. It acted like a normal rabbit, except for the horn. Yuan began to think about old Gus. Gus was a friend and a teacher. Yuan wanted to ask Gus about the rabbit. But Gus had not visited for 5 days. Yuan wondered if Gus went on a long trip. Yuan looked at the far mountains. Gus was getting old. He had a bad leg. Climbing mountains was very hard for him. Yuan looked at his own hands. He had healing magic. He wanted to use it on Gus's leg. He wanted to repay Gus for all his help. Gus was like a grandfather to Dorothy. He was like a father to Ree. They had no other relatives in this world. Yuan became serious again. Magic users are very rare. He was worried about his healing magic. If people found out, it would bring trouble. He needed to learn how to use magic secretly. He closed his eyes and thought. He wanted to make fire burn inside things. He did not want flames to show on the outside. He took a deep breath. He pointed his hand at some firewood. He imagined his body glowing like hot lava. He concentrated very hard. He opened his eyes after a long time. At first, nothing happened. The firewood looked the same. Yuan frowned. He thought his power was too weak. He thought his imagination was wrong. He sighed and felt ready to give up. Then, he heard a loud crack. The wood suddenly burst into flames. The fire was burning from the inside. Yuan was shocked. He grabbed a bucket of water. He threw the water on the fire. Steam rose into the air. He stared at the wet logs. He felt very excited. He did not fail. He actually did it. He felt proud of himself. Dorothy ran toward him again. She was smiling. She said it was time to eat. Ree was cooking rabbit meat. Dorothy jumped toward Yuan. He caught her quick. He told her not to jump so high. It was dangerous. Dorothy just giggled. She said the food was getting cold. Yuan smiled and carried her to the house. As they walked, he saw something strange. He looked at the mountains. There were many birds flying in circles. He had never seen birds act like that before. He felt worried. Dorothy tugged his sleeve again. She wanted him to hurry up and eat. Yuan took one last look at the mountains and nodded. When they got to the house, a voice called out. It was Gus. Yuan was surprised. Gus usually came early in the morning. Yuan went outside to meet him. Gus was standing by the new fence. Gus asked about the fence. Yuan said it was for protection. He said wolves and strangers are dangerous. Yuan asked why Gus was there so late. Gus said he was going to teach Yuan how to make a bow. Gus told Yuan to follow him. They went to Gus's cabin. Gus was in a hurry. He picked up wood and an axe. He told Yuan to watch. Gus put a log on the ground. He made a wooden wedge. He did not hit the log hard. He tapped the wedge little by little. The log started to crack. Finally, it split into 2 clean pieces. Gus told Yuan not to rush. He said to do it slowly. Gus gave Yuan a piece of wood. Yuan tried to do it. He was a bit clumsy at first. Gus watched him and corrected his mistakes. They worked for many hours. Gus taught him many different things. Yuan felt that something was wrong. Gus said he would only teach the bow. But he was teaching everything at once. It felt like Gus was running out of time. Yuan asked Gus if something happened. He asked if the mountain was in danger. Gus said no. He asked why Yuan was worried. Yuan told him about the circling birds. Gus was silent for a moment. He said there are wolves in the mountains. He said a wolf probably attacked someone. Gus looked serious. He gave Yuan a finished arrow. He told Yuan to use it for practice. Yuan thanked him. Gus said he would teach more another day. Yuan turned to leave. Gus watched him. Gus then spoke again. He said he went to the village a few days ago. He told the chief about goblins. The chief sent his son to a town. There is a guild branch there. The guild will send adventurers to help. They should arrive soon. Gus looked at the mountains. His face was dark. He said goblins move very fast. He said the birds were eating human bodies. Gus said a group of people were hiding in the mountains. They were near the goblins. A woman in the group probably attracted the goblins. Then, the goblins killed them all. Gus said things were going to get bad. He said the trouble would reach the village soon. Gus was very calm and cold. He said sacrifices must happen. He told Yuan that he must survive. He said Yuan was strong. Gus even said that if Ri died, Yuan could find another woman. He said Yuan could build a new family. Gus reached for a sword. He pulled it out. The blade was very bright. Gus said he was a hunter. He said hunters eventually find the greatest hunting ground. He swung the sword very fast through the air. He said there is no greater happiness than this. He kept his eyes on the mountains. He was ready for what was coming. Riggy stepped out of the cabin quietly. The morning air was very cold. She wore a thick sweater to stay warm. The wind brushed against her face. She saw Yuan working nearby. He was fixing the wooden fence around their home. He wanted to make sure the posts were strong. He wanted to keep the house safe before the winter got worse. Yuan heard his name and turned around. He saw Riggy standing in the cold. He told her it was freezing outside. He asked why she came out. Riggy did not answer right away. She smiled and held out a wooden bowl. She told him to eat. Yuan took the bowl and smiled. He told her to go back inside where it was warm. Riggy shook her head. She said she would go in after he finished eating. She wanted to spend more time with him. These words surprised Yuan. He started to blush. He felt very happy. The two of them sat down by a small campfire. The fire gave them warmth while the wind blew through the trees. Yuan ate the meal and said it was delicious. Riggy waved her hands and said it was nothing. She was just happy he liked it. Yuan did not say anything else. He just looked at her face. The light from the fire made her look beautiful. He felt like a very lucky man. He moved behind her and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. He whispered that he was grateful for her. Riggy's cheeks turned red. She put her hands on his. She told him she was even more grateful for him. They sat in silence and listened to the fire. For a moment, they felt like the rest of the world did not matter. The next morning, Yuan and Riggy went to the stream. They had to wash their clothes. Riggy told Yuan she could do it by herself. Yuan smiled and kept scrubbing. He said it would be faster if they worked together. He laughed to himself while he worked. He realized that washing machines are very important things. They had soaked the clothes in lye water all night. Now they had to rinse them in the cold stream. They wanted to hang them up to dry by sunrise. Yuan looked at Riggy. She worked hard and did not complain about the freezing water. He felt bad that she had been doing this alone for so long. Suddenly, they heard a voice. It was Dorothy. She came running toward them. A little horned rabbit was bouncing next to her. Dorothy told her father to treat the bunny. Yuan realized he had forgotten about the rabbit. He reached out to touch it. Then he saw something strange. Dorothy was holding a small cloth doll. She said her mother made it for her. Yuan said the doll was very cute. He reached down to pet the rabbit. As soon as his fingers touched the fur, a golden light appeared. The light spread all over the rabbit's body. Yuan's eyes went wide. He saw the horn on the rabbit's head disappear again. Yuan thought about what his teacher Gus had told him. They had talked about rabbits the day before. Gus said horned rabbits are demonic beasts. They live in forests and fields. Wild ones are very dangerous. But if people raise them from a young age, they can be pets. Gus never said anything about them glowing. Yuan looked into the rabbit's eyes. He wondered if it was a special kind of animal. He asked the rabbit why it was glowing. He told the rabbit not to put his family in danger. The rabbit just twitched its ears. It made a squeaking sound. Yuan was confused because rabbits usually do not make sounds. He asked if the rabbit could understand him. The rabbit just stared at him. Yuan sighed and decided to ask Gus about it later. Dorothy tugged on his sleeve. She wanted names for the bunnies. Yuan thought for a moment. He pointed to the real baby rabbit and named it Oz. Then he pointed to the doll and named it Toto. Dorothy was very excited. She repeated the names over and over. She hugged the rabbit and the doll. Riggy watched her and felt happy. She was glad Dorothy could have a peaceful childhood now. While the family was happy at the cabin, the village was full of fear. People were standing in the streets and whispering. They were talking about rumors. They heard that goblins might attack the village. One man said the village chief's son went to the city. He went to ask the guild for soldiers. Another man said goblins are very mean. He said they kill everyone and only keep the women. The villagers were very scared. Some people wanted to run away right then. They were so worried they could not sleep. The village chief was also busy. He was standing by a large carriage. He told his wife to clean it. His wife was angry. She said she had too much work to do. She did not want to clean a carriage that no one used. The chief got mad. He said they needed the carriage to escape if the goblins came. His wife asked why they couldn't use their own small cart. The chief called her a fool. He said if he used his own cart, people would think he was selfish. He told her to hide food in the carriage when no one was looking. He was frustrated because his plans were failing. He had tried to sell information about a healing mage. But the people he talked to only wanted to know if the mage was strong. He felt like nothing was working out. Deep in the mountains, Gus was hiding in the bushes. He was watching a group of goblins. The goblins were fighting each other very violently. Gus saw that a mutiny was happening. He knew that goblins are naturally mean. He knew the losers would be kicked out of the pack. When goblins are kicked out, they look for a village to attack. They want food, and they want to hurt people. Gus looked toward the village. He did not want the goblins to move yet. If they moved too soon, his plan would be ruined. He had something special in his pocket to use in emergencies. Gus thought about where to send the goblins. He thought about Dorothy. He remembered that she was a quiet child who rarely smiled. He felt a little bit of guilt. He knew that Dorothy and Riggy were outsiders. He decided they would have to be the sacrifices. He told himself it did not matter because they did not belong to the village. Gus remembered his father's words from a long time ago. His father said he was a perfect hunter, but a bad human. Gus did not mind. He believed his life was perfect because he had a big goal. He was happy to have Yuan as a student. He wanted to turn Yuan into the ultimate hunter. Gus saw the goblins starting to move toward the village. In another part of the forest, Yuan was looking at his traps. He found another rabbit in a snare. He used his knife to kill it quickly. He noticed that he did not feel bad about it anymore. He was getting used to killing for food. He realized he was changing so he could survive in this new world. He looked at the woods and decided to take a different way home. He wanted to find new places for his traps. He did not know that this choice would change everything for him. He walked deeper into the trees, thinking about his future.
Yuan ventures deeper into the mountains, hoping to find something useful, but the area is completely untouched by humans. Just as he is about to leave, a massive road deer suddenly runs past him. Yuan realizes that such a large deer could provide much more meat than the wolf he hunted before. He grabs his bow and starts chasing it. He carefully aims while running, but his foot catches on a hidden tree root, causing him to fall. By the time he gets back up, the deer has disappeared. While looking around, Yuan notices some strange footprints on the ground. They clearly aren't human, and they appear to be fairly fresh. Curious and slightly worried, he follows the tracks deeper into the forest. Meanwhile, old Gus is being chased by a large group of goblins. However, this is exactly what he planned. While running, he scatters musk deer powder behind him. The powerful scent drives the goblins into a frenzy, making them chase him even more aggressively. Gus continues leading them toward a specific location, satisfied that his plan is working. Back in the forest, Yuan continues following the mysterious footprints. The farther he goes, the more uneasy he becomes. His instincts tell him that something is wrong, but he keeps moving. Eventually, he reaches a rocky cliff and notices that the footprints continue below. Looking at their direction, Yuan realizes something terrifying. The tracks are leading toward his home. Yuan immediately jumps down and sprints back toward the cabin. He becomes terrified for Riggy and Dorothy, knowing that something dangerous may be heading straight toward them. As he runs, Yuan desperately prays that nothing will happen to his family. He begs God not to take away the people he loves after finally giving him a reason to be happy. Meanwhile, completely unaware of the danger, Dorothy happily prepares food outside the cabin. She talks to her little rabbit, Oz, telling him that they will all eat stew together when Daddy comes home. Dorothy then decides to wait near the front gate because she knows Yuan becomes happy whenever she welcomes him home. Suddenly, someone begins knocking loudly on the gate. Dorothy immediately thinks that Yuan has returned and runs toward the entrance. But she remembers Yuan's warning to always check who is outside before opening the door. She carefully looks through the gap. Her smile instantly disappears. Instead of seeing her father, she sees a hideous green goblin face staring back at her. The monster reaches its hand through the gap, trying to grab her. Dorothy freezes in fear. She wants to run, but her body refuses to move. Tears fill her eyes as the goblin tries to force the gate open. At that exact moment, Yuan returns. He sees the goblin standing outside his home and immediately realizes that Dorothy is in danger. Without even thinking about his bow, he rushes toward the creature. The goblin turns toward him, giving Yuan the perfect opportunity. Yuan launches himself into the air and delivers a powerful flying kick directly to the goblin's head, sending it crashing several meters away. He immediately runs toward Dorothy and asks if she is okay. The moment she hears his voice, Dorothy breaks down and cries, relieved that her father has returned safely. Yuan comforts her and assures her that everything is okay because Daddy is here. But their relief lasts only a moment. Suddenly, dozens of goblins begin emerging from the forest, surrounding the cabin from every direction. Yuan realizes that the goblin at the gate was only the beginning. He quickly places Dorothy behind him and tells her to stay inside. He knows that his bow and arrows won't be enough against such a large group, so he throws them aside and draws his sword instead. His fear slowly turns into determination. Yuan grips his sword tightly and stares at the monsters surrounding his family. He declares that he doesn't care whether there are dozens or even hundreds of them. He will kill every last goblin to protect his family. The goblins roar and charge toward the cabin. Yuan steps forward to face them, prepared to risk everything to protect the people he loves. Dorothy breaks down in tears after seeing her father return. Even though Yuan is there and she is safe, she remains terrified because there are still countless monsters outside. She worries that her father might disappear, just like her previous father did in the mountains. Meanwhile, Yuan continues fighting the goblins with his massive axe. He cuts down one monster after another without hesitation, but he also begins suffering injuries himself. Something strange catches his attention. Despite watching their companions get slaughtered, the goblins show no fear at all. Instead, they continue charging with disturbing smiles. Yuan quickly realizes the truth. The goblins aren't targeting him. They're after his wife and daughter. Enraged, Yuan charges forward and unleashes a massive wave of blazing fire. The flames spread across the battlefield, burning and destroying goblins one after another. At the same time, more goblins begin trying to enter through the fence near the house. Riggy immediately tells Dorothy to run inside, lock the door, and hide under the bed. Dorothy asks what will happen to her mother, but Riggy tells her that she is going outside to help Yuan. A goblin approaches, leaving Riggy no time to hesitate. She grabs a bamboo spear and attacks it, hoping to protect the house while Yuan fights the main group. Her spear wounds the goblin's arm, but the attack barely affects it. The monster grabs the spear and stops it effortlessly. Dorothy becomes terrified when she realizes the monsters are trying to enter the house. She begins crying and fears that both her parents might be eaten and disappear. Suddenly, her little pet Z rushes toward the goblin. Dorothy desperately tells it to come back, but Z fearlessly jumps onto the monster and begins scratching its face. The unexpected attack gives Dorothy courage, and she starts cheering for her little companion. Riggy watches as well. At that moment, Yuan notices the goblin getting dangerously close to his family. He immediately swings his massive axe and cuts the goblin's head off. Z safely jumps away. Dorothy becomes excited and praises her little pet for being brave. She then decides that she will also do her best to help. When another goblin tries climbing over the fence, Dorothy points it out and declares that she and Z are one body and one mind. Eventually, the battle comes to an end. Yuan stands among the bodies of the defeated goblins. Hearing Riggy calling his name, he immediately rushes toward her and pulls her into a tight embrace. He tells her how relieved he is that she wasn't injured. Soon, Dorothy also runs over and hugs her father. Yuan gently asks whether she was scared. Seeing both his wife and daughter alive and safe, he finally lets out a deep breath and thanks God. However, Yuan knows they are not completely safe yet. He looks toward the mountain and tells his family that they need to leave before nightfall. The monsters may become even more active after dark, and traveling down the mountain at night would be extremely dangerous. He then warns that getting down the mountain could still be chaotic and dangerous, meaning their troubles may not be over yet. After the battle, Yuan thinks about his old life and realizes that although he had many problems back then, he still had freedom. Unlike the people in this village, he isn't willing to let anyone control where he and his family live. He decides that if the villagers try to stop him from leaving with Riggy and Dorothy, he will force his way out, even if he has to steal a horse and carriage. Riggy then tells him about a large and used carriage in the village. She believes they might be able to trade their wolf pelts for it. Yuan understands that Riggy is probably worried the villagers won't let them leave, but she is trying to hide her anxiety. He comforts her by placing his forehead against hers and promises that he will figure something out. Dorothy suddenly interrupts their quiet moment, and Yuan hugs his daughter. Looking at his wife and daughter, he silently promises himself that he will protect them no matter what happens. Meanwhile, someone examines the aftermath of the goblin attack and realizes that Yuan killed all of them by himself. The burn marks clearly came from inside the goblins, proving that Yuan used powerful fire magic. The man is shocked to discover that Yuan can use both healing magic and fire magic, meaning he has two magical affinities. He also realizes that the village chief has been hiding important information. Hiding or selling a mage from the territory is punishable by death. The man concludes that the chief is finished, but he also believes the entire village is guilty. According to him, the villagers knew about the goblins and deliberately sent an inexperienced young man into the mountains without warning him. They even tried to prevent people from escaping. He becomes completely disgusted with the village and believes that everyone there deserves to die. Meanwhile, Yuan, Riggy, and Dorothy return to the village. The villagers immediately notice them and begin calling Yuan the Mountain Keeper. Yuan senses that something is wrong with the atmosphere. The villagers seem tense, and several unfamiliar people appear to be trying to leave the area rather than arriving. An argument breaks out when some adventurers complain that the villagers gave them terrible supplies despite expecting them to go into the mountains. Then they notice the village chief. The chief asks Yuan why he has returned and why he has so much luggage. Yuan calmly gives him the answer. 50 goblins showed up. The chief is shocked and asks how there could be 50. One of the adventurers immediately becomes furious because they were told there were only 10 goblins. The chief tries to deny responsibility, claiming that Gus told him there were only 10. Yuan immediately realizes what happened. He remembers the warning he received earlier and understands that the villagers knew about the goblins all along. They deliberately sent his family into the mountains without telling them the truth. Even worse, Yuan realizes that Gus had also deceived him and led him directly into the trap. Yuan refuses to waste any more time. He asks Riggy where the carriage is, and she points toward the area behind the chief's house. When a man tries to stop Yuan from leaving, Yuan immediately punches him with enough force to send him flying. Everyone freezes. Yuan warns the villagers not to stop him again, making it clear that he will kill anyone who tries. He knows night is approaching, and they need to escape the village before things become even more dangerous. Riggy spots the carriage, and Yuan realizes that it is large enough for the entire family. He puts Dorothy inside while Riggy prepares the horse. Just as they are about to leave, a woman runs toward them and angrily claims that the carriage belongs to her. She tries to take back her belongings and food. Yuan steps between her and Riggy and pushes her away. The woman begins screaming that the mountain keeper is killing people and stealing their carriage. Her son tries to pull her away, but she continues complaining that they are taking what belongs to them. Yuan ignores her. He places Riggy inside the carriage, takes the driver's seat, and immediately starts moving toward the village exit. But as they travel farther away, Yuan suddenly notices an old man standing ahead of them. Then he sees something even worse. A huge group of goblins appears in front of them. Yuan's expression changes instantly. He finally understands the truth. It was all a trap. Gus had deliberately led the goblins toward them and manipulated the entire situation from the beginning. Yuan looks toward the old man in disbelief and becomes furious. He cannot understand why Gus would betray them, especially after everything that had happened. As Gus prepares to leave the area, Yuan realizes that he, his wife, and Dorothy have been deceived from the very beginning, and they have driven directly into the enemy's trap. The village is surrounded by fire, and the situation is becoming worse by the second. Yuan realizes that they have fallen into a carefully prepared trap. The front of the village is filled with goblins, so escaping that way is almost impossible. He decides they must find another route through the back. Yuan is furious because he realizes that the villagers have already abandoned his family once. He cannot trust them anymore. He fears that if the villagers get the chance, they will use Lizzie and Dorothy as bait to save themselves. While the village burns around them, Yuan worries about how he can protect his family by himself. For the first time, he truly understands what it means to have people he loves depending on him. The fear of losing them makes his heart feel like it is burning. Lizzie notices how worried her father is and tells him not to be scared. She says that she believes in him. Dorothy also promises that she will protect her mommy. Their words calm Yuan down. He realizes that he cannot panic. If he wants his family to survive, he must stay focused. Yuan then unleashes his fire magic against the goblins. His powerful flames destroy several enemies and help clear a path. The fire is spreading everywhere. However, so even after defeating the goblins, they are still trapped inside the burning village. Yuan encounters other villagers fighting the goblins. Surprisingly, some of them are holding their own against the monsters. He realizes that these people could be useful allies in the fight. However, he still remembers that they left his family to die, so he refuses to completely trust them. As the battle continues, Yuan and the villagers fight their way through the burning streets. Goblins attack from different directions, and several people are injured. Yuan kills another goblin and orders everyone to keep moving. The villagers realize that staying together may be their best chance of surviving. Meanwhile, the chapter reveals that the entire disaster was planned. An older, hooded man watches the village burn. He explains that he scattered musk powder around the front gate, back gate, and broken sections of the fence. He also used decades-old pine resin and oil to make the fire spread quickly and burn for a long time. The mysterious man says that everything is going exactly according to his plan. He has waited a very long time for this day. His goal is not simply to attack the village. He wants both the goblins and villagers trapped inside, so nobody can escape. He also believes that the village chief will eventually be punished. Even if the villagers survive and reach their lord, the chief will be blamed for what happened and will face a terrible death. The hooded man then reveals his dark belief that people in this world cannot be trusted. According to him, the only person you can truly depend on is yourself. He seems to share the same anger and hatred that Yuan carries. Eventually, Yuan manages to get his family through the dangerous area. Dorothy is amazed by her father and proudly calls him a fire mage. She even says that because she is his daughter, she will become a mage too. However, Yuan's hands become numb from using so much power. Since Dorothy is still young, he realizes that her fire magic will naturally be smaller, so he patiently teaches her and helps her understand how to control it. After surviving the disaster, Yuan finally gets a moment with his family. Lizzie notices that he looks exhausted and pale. He says that he does not have much appetite, but she insists that he eat something. The family comforts each other, and Juwon tells Lizzie that protecting his family is simply something he should do. But their peace does not last. Other survivors eventually approach them and beg Juwon for help. They have nowhere else to go and desperately ask him to let them stay. Juwon becomes angry because these are the same people who abandoned his family earlier. He tells them to stay away and blames them for their current situation. The survivors continue begging, saying there is no hope anywhere else. Juwon refuses to simply carry them. Instead, he realizes that his body has recovered enough thanks to Lizzie, and he tells the frightened people that if they truly want to survive, they must fight for their own lives.
The village is under attack by a group of goblins, and the villagers are terrified. Juwon tells them that he cannot protect people who refuse to fight, so the villagers finally pick up their weapons and join the battle. But the goblins are much stronger and more dangerous than they expected. Just when things become chaotic, Juwon steps forward and starts fighting them himself. He moves incredibly fast and takes down the goblins one after another. The villagers are shocked by how powerful he is. After a long fight, the goblins are finally defeated. Juwon looks around and asks if there are any goblins left in the village. Once he realizes the immediate danger is over, he decides to leave. The villagers thank him because many of them survived only because of his help. Juwon is ready to move on, but the villagers warn him that there could still be more goblins nearby. Instead of leaving immediately, Juwon decides to stay a little longer. Soon, he returns to the carriage where Lizzie and Dorothy are waiting. Oz turns out to be extremely troublesome. The little creature suddenly attacks one of the adults, knocking him down. Dorothy gets angry and tells Oz that hitting people is wrong. She even apologizes for Oz's behavior. The scene becomes surprisingly funny, and Juwon also has trouble taking the situation seriously. Then winter arrives. Snow begins to fall, and Juwon realizes that this is the first snow he has seen since coming to this world. But instead of enjoying the beautiful scenery, he sees the destruction left behind by the battle. The village is still burning, and many people are lying dead in the streets. Juwon is relieved that Lizzie and Dorothy are safe inside the carriage. He finds a barn and decides to use the hay to keep the horses warm and protect everyone from the cold. For a moment, everything seems peaceful, but Juwon suddenly realizes something is wrong. He remembers the person responsible for everything. Someone had pretended to be a good person and gained Juwon's trust. But behind the scenes, that person had been trying to kill Lizzie and Dorothy. Juwon immediately becomes suspicious. He goes back to investigate and discovers an old man hiding near the village. The old man reveals that he has his own reason for hating Juwon. He says that because of magic, his family suffered a terrible death. He blames Juwon and refuses to forgive him. The old man then attacks. Juwon fights back, and the battle becomes extremely intense. The old man is surprisingly strong, but Juwon refuses to back down. His eyes become cold, and he remembers an important lesson from his past. In this harsh world, trust yourself and protect your family. That memory gives Juwon even more determination. The fight reaches its climax, and Juwon finally defeats the old man. But then he discovers something shocking. The enemy isn't actually human. Juwon sees the color of his blood and realizes that the old man is a goblin in disguise. Juwon is relieved that his suspicion was correct, but he is also exhausted and injured after the battle. And then things get even worse. Juwon discovers that the village's fences are still burning. The fire is spreading, and the flames are blocking their escape route. Juwon tells Lizzie to take the driver's seat of the carriage. If something happens, she needs to get Dorothy to safety. Then Juwon turns toward the flames. He knows he has to clear a path through the fire. Even though the heat is intense enough to burn him, Juwon steps forward and uses his magic. He gathers his strength and releases a powerful attack toward the burning barrier. For a moment, it looks like the flames are going to overwhelm him. Then, boom. Juwon's attack destroys the burning fence and opens a path through the fire. Lizzie watches in shock as the flames disappear. But Juwon has pushed himself too far. He is badly exhausted and can barely remain standing. Lizzie immediately runs toward him. She calls out his name and reaches for him, terrified that something has happened to him. Juwon finally collapses into her arms.